2010 meeting of the Indian County Planning and Zoning Commission will come to order. Please stand with the
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Nay. It's approved unanimously. The council now will make some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go ahead and get some things on the record regarding this regarding this item, St. Edward's Private School. This is for Commissioner Zimmerman. Commissioner Zimmerman, are you on the board of trustees for St. Ed School?
Yes, I am.
Do you receive any financial compensation for being in that position?
No.
Do you have any kids who attend the school?
I have 2 children who attend there.
Do you receive any type of discounts or financial compensation or benefits for?
No.
No. All right. Based on that, I just want to go ahead and get on the record that there is no conflict, and Mr. Zimmerman's Commissioner Zimmerman is fully able to engage in debate and vote on this topic.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next 2 items are quasi-judicial, so would all those who wish to speak or may speak please stand to be sworn in.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. And item A is the St. Edward's Private School associated with the parking lot. Staff.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Smith. John McCoy with the planning staff. This is a companion application to a staff level approval of a site plan that the staff is currently reviewing. And the staff level site plan application has not been approved because that site plan application is dependent upon the parking study approval. The parking study will essentially set the parking rate for the staff level approval. And with that, I'd like to show you the location. The site is located on the South Barrier Island, and it is located south of Sandpoint West and north of the moorings. And that particular area of the moorings is the golf course and tennis club. And the site is zoned RS3, as is all the adjacent property. The aerial will show you the subject development a little bit better. Again, Sandpoint West to the north, residential development, single family. To the south, the moorings and basically some of the moorings recreational area. Most of the development on the site is located to the east side of the site, with the parking being on the north side and the buildings being on the southeast and the parking being on the northeast. The parking study methodology, the data was collected over 3 days for 3 schools, including the 2 St. Edward's campuses. And essentially what they do is they count the number of cars on 15-minute intervals, and they take the highest number of cars in any 15-minute interval, and that's the peak parking demand and the peak parking time within that 15-minute interval. So that's the observed peak demand and observed peak time within that 15-minute interval. Observed peak demands adjusted with the safety factor. In this case, it was adjusted a little bit higher than the 15% safety factor. The results of the parking study, with the additional safety factor, the results determined that the parking rate was 1 space per 2.5 students, or a total of 264 spaces for the 660 students proposed after the school's consolidated K through 12, which is what the site plan is proposing to do. The site plan proposes some minor parking improvements, minor campus improvements, a playground, and the things really to facilitate the consolidation of the school and getting a little bit of physical separation between K through 5, the middle school, and the upper school. The parking study indicates that they're proposing a total of 315 spaces. So with that, there will be a surplus spaces, approximately 51 spaces surplus. Staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission approve the parking study and set that parking rate at one parking space per 2.5 students, and that will allow the review and approval of the companion staff level site plan approval to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Commission, any questions or
John.
comments?
With this in mind and the surplus parking, then this would cap the school at 787?
That's correct. It'd be just a little under 800.
I mean, this kind of ties all together with what would be the cap, even though there are not that many students there. That would allow that to happen, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
John, what are the conditions that would cause consolidation to reduce the number of necessary parking spaces?
I'm not sure I understand what the conditions
Is there a consolidation of middle school, high school, and elementary sites that has something to do with the number of spaces that are required?
Right now on the campus, the campus supports the middle school and the upper school. So the parking was based on the enrollment for those, and based on typically a high school is going to have a little higher parking demand because of the ability of some of the students in the higher grades to drive. So when they consolidated it, that's why they reviewed it and took a look at it. And if they went straight by the code, it would be a much higher parking number based on the code if you aggregated the two uses, the elementary school and then the upper and middle school.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, John. Currently, the LDRs, you calculate the parking for the school by number of classrooms, not number of students. So
Correct.
Are you changing the LDR, or are you just adding a new category to the LDR with this classification?
This will be a specialty rate that will be used for St. Ed's. In other words, they're setting their own parking rate and demand. So it will not change the LDRs. When the parking LDRs are reviewed, we may look at changing the standard based on the information we have from this study and the empirical data that's been collected over time, but this will not change the LDRs. And when you're doing a school, it's difficult because there are a lot of ways you could do it. You could do it as it's done in the code. You can do it by students. You could do it by square footage. You could do it by a couple of different variables. Enrollment's fairly easily in a solid number to track, so you can tie it back. Classrooms, say you have 10 classrooms and 30 kids per classroom. Well, if you base it on classrooms, that's 300 students. If you have 20 classrooms and 15 students per classroom, you have those same 300 students. But if you're using classrooms as a variable, again,
actually, that's where I was going there with that question. Should we be looking at the other requirements in the land development regulations where we stop using classrooms and we start using number of students, especially if we're going to be going down to, what, 22 students per class?
It probably is a more accurate measurement, probably easier to track.
Right. With the public schools, it'll vary by grade. Elementary schools will have a lower number and the high school have a higher number based on class size, but it may be a better variable, and again, it's one that's probably good to cross-check. Square footage is the easiest for us to cross-check, but again, depending upon how you organize it and operationally how you use it, it may not be the best variable.
I was just wondering if maybe we should be looking at the LDR and making a change to the entire LDR to adopt this. Thank you.
Any other questions from Commission?
You ready for a motion?
Yeah, then we'll look. Yes. I'll have a motion. Yes.
Plowing right ahead. I move we approve staff's recommendation.
I'll second it.
Is it appropriate to ask if anyone from St. Ed's or the...
That'd probably be appropriate.
Okay. Is there anyone from St. Edwards or from the audience that would like to speak?
Can I withdraw my... No.
No, you don't.
We do not have a formal presentation tonight. I'm Steve Moeller with Mass Seller Moeller, for the record. I wanted to thank staff for their review and support of this application. With me tonight is Ron Edwards, Chairman of the St. Edwards School Board, Board of Trustees, excuse me, as well as Dick Yarborough, the Finance Director, and Dan Simmons, Building and Grounds Chairman. So we appreciate your looking to approve this tonight, and if there's any questions that any of us could answer, we'd be glad to do so.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Carries unanimously. Now, item number 4 is the reschedule of the appeal for Lakeside Fellowship Baptist Church. Stan, this is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stan Bowling, County Planning Director. A couple of things just to start out before I go through the PowerPoint. This item was originally scheduled for the January 28th Planning and Zoning Commission and was rescheduled to this meeting. There were, in both instances, notices sent out to surrounding property owners, and we did not hear any response one way or the other from any adjacent property owners. Mike Hotchkiss is here from Utility Services if you have any questions about him. And before the meeting this afternoon, I'd gotten an email from Brian Nolan, the fire marshal, and I made a copy of that and passed that out to you all and to Mr. Barquette. Nothing new in that, really, from what's indicated in staff's report, but I did want to explain that. I'd like to go over the item that's before you all. This is an appeal of a decision of the Community Development Director, and it's with respect to a connection to a potable water line for a site that lies outside of and does not abut the urban service area. This slide shows the urban service area and to kind of the shaded in area closer to the river and the coast. The eastern portion of the county is within the urban service area. And in some places north of State Road 60, 66th Avenue is the boundary, the north-south boundary. For quite a stretch, it's actually a point that's halfway between 66th Avenue and 58th Avenue. Then as you get back towards Sebastian, it comes back further west and, of course, includes the city limits of Sebastian, then out by Bureau Lake Estates. There's a large, several thousand acre AG1 agriculturally zoned area, an agriculturally designated area, and that's the area of the subject site. The subject site's a little below this red line here, so they're close to the edge of the urban service area, but they do not abut it. This is a little better location map of the site itself. The church site itself is here in gray, and it's pretty good east-west dimension. We'll see in a moment there are already some existing facilities on the western portion of the site and a new, more permanent church building going up kind of in the northwestern portion of the site. The site does not abut the urban service area boundary that's shown in red coming down 66th Avenue and turning east along 81st Street. So there are properties between this site and the urban service boundary to the north and to the east. It's an aerial of the site showing the initial construction that's been in place for a number of years, some modular units for the existing church. You see the driveway and parking area that's there. There is a stormwater area here to the east and a larger lake further to the east. There's now the permanent church building is located in this area on the north side of this driveway, even though it's not shown. Again, off the slide to the north and to the east is the urban service area boundary. In 2002, the church facility, the modular buildings that you just saw on the aerial, were approved, site plan approved. There's no connection to water or sewer service with that initial construction. There's use of a well, a septic drain field, and a dry hydrant system for that facility, and the facility was CO'd in 2006 and is still in use. Last year, in 2009, a site plan was approved for church expansion. It's a permanent building that's on the north side of the main driveway to the site, and that building is under construction now. During the 2009 site plan review, going through the technical review committee, There was a staff written comment by Utility Services, quoted here: "The project lies outside of the USA," that stands for Urban Service Area. "Water and sewer are not available." Project engineer repeated and acknowledged that comment in writing. It's a standard written response that's required to all staff comments. The site plan listing of permits required, and that is a requirement of the site plan ordinance to list all the required permits for construction. The site plan listing of permits required did not include a utility connection permit to the water line. The site plan was approved, did have a sheet C6, and again, this is referenced in the staff report. It showed a fire line connection from water main that's in the 66th Avenue right-of-way to the new church building. The site plan approved by staff, but the water line connection was not approved by utilities. Later, the project engineer approached Utility Services for a water line connection permit, and at that time, utilities refused issuing the permit, referring to their previous comments in the TRC, and referred the project engineer to community development. And the community development director denied a request for a connection, and that denial was in writing. It's in your backup. And the basis of that denial was the potable water sub-element policy 5.7. Now, a copy of that policy is in your backup as well, but I did want to read through and have it up on the screen some of the key points of policy 5.7. There's a similar policy on sewer, but for purposes of this, really just the water line connection applies. Consistent with the policies of the future land use settlement of this plan, provision of potable water service shall be limited to the following areas. First, areas within the urban service area. That does not apply to this case. This lies outside the urban service area. Another possibility would be for areas where the county has legal commitments to provide facilities and services as of the date of adoption of this plan, and that does not apply to the site as well. Another possibility is for areas outside the urban service area where at least a portion of the site is contiguous to an urban service area boundary. And we can kind of stop there for this one because, again, this site does not abut the urban service area boundary. There are other conditions under this allowance, but you can read it, but I won't take up your time with that this evening. Another possibility are development projects that have certain characteristics and go through a certain process for approval, such as clustering of residential development, mixed-use districts, traditional neighborhood designs, and public facilities such as public schools. And none of those exceptions apply to this particular proposal. Also, areas where potable water, there's a risk of private well contamination, and it's needed for drinking purposes. That does not apply in this case. And there's also an allowance for approved agricultural businesses, and that does not apply. So staff reads this policy and has applied this policy. There's this connection that's proposed is not allowed. The applicant has appealed the community development decision to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and staff laid out in our report the different criteria you all have. And certainly the applicant will make his case this evening, but we kind of boiled down three major contentions that the applicant has. And one of those is that a contention that policy 5.7 does not apply to fire line connections. It would apply to a connection for drinking water, for instance, but not a fire line connection. Another contention is that the fire line connection is safer than other alternatives, so it's a safety issue, and that should somehow apply to what policy 5.7 says or doesn't say. The last contention, just as far as our summary of it goes, is that the purpose of policy 5.7 is not served by the denial, since the church use will be there one way or the other. So it's not directing a use into the urban service area, so denying the fire line connection doesn't serve the purpose of the urban service boundary. Staff's responses to those contentions, and again this is outlined in staff's report, is that it's actually clear in the policy that the policy applies to potable water service. If you go back to the very first part, provision of potable water service shall be limited. And this particular proposal is to connect to potable water service. And so staff's position is that policy 5.7 clearly applies. Fire safety is addressed by the fire code, and in that there are alternatives to the fire line connection used by facilities that are outside the urban service area now, including the existing church facility that's out there. So there are alternatives that meet the fire safety code, and compliance with the fire safety code is the measure for fire safety. Lastly, the connection prohibitions in 5.7, they do direct urban uses into the urban service area. It's an important policy. If for some reason there's a type of use that must have public water and sewer service for whatever reasons, then this policy directs them into the urban service area. And if alternatives are more expensive than connecting to urban services, then that actually is a disincentive for developing outside the urban service area and is an incentive for developing inside the urban service area. And staff's also concerned with this type of argument that allowing extensions incrementally outside the urban service area, it is kind of a one step at a time, and there is a precedent issue that's at stake in applying the policy as it's written. The Planning and Zoning Commission's review, there are 4 criteria, and I've just abbreviated these in this PowerPoint slide, but it's spelled out in your packet. And there are 4 criteria that you all are to look at for what the Community Development Director has done, and they're basically these. Was there a failure to follow appropriate review procedures? Was the decision acting in an arbitrary or capricious manner? In making the decision, did he fail to consider the effects of the development, and did he fail to apply comprehensive plan and LDRs appropriately? I don't believe there's any contention with respect to the actual review procedure part of it, but I think the applicant can make his case on the other elements of the criteria. Staff's position is that the Community Development Director did not fail in making the decision to deny the proposed water service connection. And staff's recommendation is that the Planning and Zoning Commission find that the Community Development Director did not fail in any of those 4 criteria, and to deny the appeal and affirm the Community Development Director decision. That's my summary of the appeal. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have. And again, just remind you that Mike Hotchkiss is here from the Utilities Department if you have any questions about utility matters.
Thank you, Stan. Before the Commission has questions of staff, is there anyone who has just come in the audience who wishes to speak to this issue who's not been sworn in? Okay. Could you stand, please?
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you. Commission, questions of staff?
I have a question. The site plan was approved, correct? Showing the line connected to the water supply.
The site plan was actually, yes, the site plan was approved, and it was actually inconsistent internally. It did not list the a utility connection permit, and it did not correspond with the applicant's acknowledgement, but it did include sheet C6, which shows a fire line connection.
Did previous versions of the site plan that preceded the final site plan show that connection? Or is it something that was slipped in?
Right. That I don't know. I don't recall, and we don't have any copies in our files of any previous versions. They would have been, recycled when the new ones came out. So I can't say with 100% confidence whether or not that sheet C6 was in the initial submittals or not.
Were other permits that were required for the project, were all the other permits that were required for the project listed on the site plan with the exception of the one that would be required to hook that line up?
I believe that's correct.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stan, just from philosophically for a minute, this is, I personally think, ahead of time, I wait to hear what Bruce has to say, that Bob has followed the policy, and I think this is more of a policy issue than it may be for an LDR issue, and that may not help them on the appeal tonight. But on the other hand, you kind of wonder, it begs to in reason, when we've got the water supply available if they're very close, and it's not a public facility, but it is sort of a public facility in the fact that it's a church. That's very different than a residential development and the prevention thereof within the system. So I'm not sure I'm not sure I agree with the fact that whether they should or shouldn't be hooked up, but I'm not sure we're preventing anything here. I think that there's a clear meaning to the law, to the rule, that we want to prevent the development outside or the ease of development by making water available. But, the reality is if we've got a system that's not far away, and we've had this discussion, why not, hook them up? I mean, it helps the county revenues. I think Mike can address that maybe, but I'm just, I'm kind of curious why we would, other than the rule, following this thing to the letter of the law, this would not be something that we might not really be to the benefit of the county to have them off the septic tanks and off something, because it is a more public spot than a housing residential section. And the precedence, I think, is what Bob's worried about and a stickler for, and I think he's probably right for that. But
that, and the whole basis really of having an urban service area and a not an urban service area is delineating where urban type of growth should go. When you start providing urban services outside the urban service area, the landowners there have a good argument that, well, then if we've got urban services and everyone's connected, why aren't we in the urban service area, and why don't we have urban densities here?
So churches are the one exception. If you, you go right out 58th, and this is the grayest of all areas, and it's.
And I can tell you, we have people that are relatively close to the urban service line, all wanting potable water service all the time, mostly in single-family residences. But again, if you extend it a little bit and you provide urban services, I think it's a valid reason for property owners to make that you should extend the urban service area, you should give us higher densities, and we should be able to get more yield from our property.
I understand the reasoning behind the rule. I just, at times, I often wonder maybe if common sense shouldn't carry forth if that's possible. So.
And if I could just comment, just historically looking back, I think probably more than once, for instance, on 58th Avenue, south of State Road 60 over the years, the question is always, well, should we extend the urban service area a quarter mile on the west
40
side?
acres to the
We've
west.
got the line running down 58th.
Right.
And I think actually the policy 5.7, as it's written with the exceptions, was the compromise. If you abut the urban service area boundary and your building is within 500 feet of the center line and you get that. So it does, I think, it was crafted with that in mind. But
the last question, I understand where Sam's coming from, I think, but doesn't the water line go right by them on 66? So the definition is it's the urban service area line, not the water line. And that's it's kind of the question.
Do I have to be sworn in to say anything?
Yes, you do.
I do fall into this. Everything you're talking about is exactly.
Sir, could you wait until the commission gets finished, and we're going to give you an opportunity to comment, certainly.
Can I jump in? One question I have when I read through this thing, and I read it very carefully, it gets to the first point that that Mr. Barquette has said. And do you guys, when I read 5.7, I don't doubt that the intent when it was written was to include fire line. But it's far from abundantly clear when I read water and sewer and potable water, and the very definition is potable as drinking water. It's far from clear in my mind that would include, fire hydrants and fire lines. Are you telling me are you telling me that 5.7 couldn't be improved and couldn't have a clearer meaning so that anybody that could read that would clearly understand that would be what's included? Because I tell you, the way I read 5.7, I think there is some gray area, and I would say this further. In the comments, which is on, page 6 of, where it says, number 34, it says county utilities, plan, plat, water, and sewer. It says project lies outside the urban service area. Water and sewer are not available. And when I think of water and sewer, and particularly when those two words are together, I'm thinking of a drain and water coming out. I'm not thinking of water coming out of, a sprinkler system above. But I'll tell you, when I get down to number 35, which is directly below it, and it says Fire Division Development Review, I almost would more expect to see some kind of language that would prohibit a fire line hookup in there. I guess what I'm saying is, in both the 5.7 and between 34 and 35, I could see how someone could miss the concept that you were trying to convey to them, both in 5.7 and in this letter, that they were prohibited from hooking in to a fire line. I am troubled by the fact that the permit, and I look forward to hearing from the civil engineer for the applicant, I am troubled by the fact that the permit request was not listed on the application, because I think if they're going to agree with me that there was some confusion, they're going to have to speak to that issue. But it's not black and white. I think 5.7 in the EAR, as we go towards rewriting this thing, if our intent is to make sure that fire lines are part of that prohibition, we better be darn sure that we say that, because it's unclear. It's a little unclear to me.
And my only comment on that, and I'll let Mike comment too if he wishes, I think the term water is pretty inclusive. Water, not available. Well, it's potable water. The comment says water and sewer not available. Water not available. And the line itself is carrying potable water. It is a potable water line. It's true. I think any policy, or when we get into any kind of interpretation thing, I think you certainly can clarify things, and that's a possibility. And they would have to say the same thing for irrigation. You can't use it for irrigation or any other purpose.
And actually, that was my point. Really, the county provides two types of water. We have potable water, and we provide reuse water. So here we're saying that they can't connect to a potable water line, regardless of the purpose they're going to use it for. But we're not saying that they couldn't connect to a reuse line for, irrigation. That may be an appropriate type of facility to put, we may want farms to use reuse water. That may be appropriate. And this policy 5.7 doesn't prohibit that, from us extending reuse lines out there. But I think basically it's potable water because that's what's in the water line. And regardless, it doesn't matter what they're using it for, they can't connect to the potable water line.
I don't doubt from experience, having dealt with you all, that you probably were very clear. I mean, I don't think the applicant probably misunderstood this, but I think the question is it public or is it not, or is it close enough that we should be considering this and without the ramifications of spread. But anyway,
Mr. George?
We'll see what they have to say.
Stan, what other churches and schools outside of the urban service area have connected to water lines?
There are some that abut the urban service area boundary, like 58th Avenue, like First Church of God. They're within 500 feet of the urban service area boundary, and they are connected to water and to sewer. I think Emmanuel Church is in the same. I think they're in the same position.
They haven't actually connected.
They haven't connected yet.
Yeah, but they're trying to.
I can't think of too many.
Storm Grove?
There's
yes,
some
they
schools, but they're institutional.
Yeah, Storm Grove Middle School abuts the urban service boundary, and they are connected to water and sewer.
But I think it allows institutional.
Mike, your microphone's not on.
Your public facilities are allowed that.
Oh, no, it was on. You're just not close enough.
I have a question. It seems like it's a bit of semantics here with fire water line or potable water, but I mean, aren't we regulated that for fire water availability it has to be potable water for health reasons? As my understanding, you can't use reuse water, so a fire engine isn't pumping that into a structure fire to be spreading whatever bacteria may be there. So with that understanding, I mean, it's potable water.
Yeah, it's really for a pressure reason too. You know, we have to pressurize the potable water system to fight fires, so we have to use potable water for our fire system. And it really poses a problem, especially if you're just using a line that's extended to a dead end just to fight fires, because it never gets flushed out or anything. The disinfectant kind of dies out on it, and so you create an environment for all kinds of bacteria or algae and stuff like that that could backfeed into your system unless you're out there doing routine flushing of it and stuff like that. And that causes kind of a problem with our operation department too. So it's not a real ideal situation to have that kind of system, especially if there's no other use on it, or if it's not looped, that kind of stuff. Right.
Other questions?
My only heartburn with this is that the applicant's engineer specifies in writing to the county that he understands that water and sewer is not available. He acknowledged that in writing. So that's where my confusion is on this.
No, I think that Donna, you and George both have, I think, will be an interesting question. That is that it's obvious that sometime after it was recognized that that line was on the plan, that responses from the staff and from the county indicated that that was not a possibility for connection. So that's an issue. I also read the appeal, and if that is being recognized, then is this just a matter of council requesting that in this case the connectivity could occur? So, Mr. Barquette, the appellant representative, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As most of you know, my name is Bruce Barquette. I'm a lawyer. I speak for people. Tonight I'm speaking for the people of Lakeside Fellowship Baptist Church. Y'all raised some really good issues and some really good questions, and before I bring Aaron Bowles up here to answer the questions about what the engineer went through, let me point out a couple of things. Had this issue come up before, had we known that the fire line connection, in other words, as soon as that was made known, I would have appealed it then. So nobody's trying to do a gotcha here. If it had been known then, they would have brought it to my attention. I'd have appealed it at that time. So, you know, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I'm not trying to acquire this permit because we slipped it through on a site plan. I don't think that's a good reason to. If it was slipped through, then I don't think that's a valid reason for an appeal, and I didn't appeal it on that basis. As soon as it became known, and we got a final decision from Bob, that's when I was brought in to file the appeal. But had it become known 9 months ago, that's when I'd have filed the appeal. So I just want to make it clear, I'm not trying to do a gotcha here. But as I said, I'm representing the folks at Lakeside Fellowship Baptist Church, and like Stan said, they're building a new site-built sanctuary to replace their modular sanctuary. The modular sanctuary was served by a dry fire hydrant, which was fed by a pond. I learned a lot doing this appeal. The dry fire hydrant was connected to a pond by lines. They were not pressurized. When a fire engine has to come to fight a fire, it connects to that fire hydrant. The fire engine becomes a pump. It pumps water from that pond through the dry fire hydrant to fight the fire. The modular building was not sprinkled because it was so small it did not have to be sprinkled, which means it didn't have to have permanent sprinklers like you have in here. The new site-built structure is large enough that it's required to be sprinkled. The only issue tonight is whether we can connect to the public water line for sprinkling for fire services. Now, I was confused by what Mike said, because lots of facilities connect to the public water line for sprinkling. And Mike, you said, oh, it causes all kinds of problems because it's a dead end. Well, that happens all over the county. So I'm not an engineer. Aaron Bowles is an engineer, but I don't really understand that comment. If you're trying to say that we can't do this for public health, safety, and public health, safety, and welfare reasons, I just have to disagree with that.
Well, this is just one more that's outside the urban service area.
Understood, but aren't there are facilities all over the county that are connected to the public water line that are sprinkled with public water, but they don't ever turn on unless there's a fire.
They're sprinkled or fire hydrants?
Sprinkled.
Well, sprinkles a different situation.
That's
That
the only
has
thing
to
we're
come with
asking for.
detective
No,
check.
only thing we're asking for is sprinkling tonight. That's not a different situation. That's the only situation we're here about.
But if you have to extend the dead end pretty far into the facility, then, you're...
But you do that all in buildings all over the county, right?
Mr. Chairman, it's fine for Mr. Barquette to ask questions, but he really does need to allow the Mr. Hotchkiss to finish his answers before he interrupts.
Actually, you know what? You're really not in a position to make objections for this gentleman. So...
I believe I am, and I just...
let's keep it civil and...
Well, I'm trying to. I'm just trying to get a straight answer from this witness.
But yeah, that's true. There's stuff like that, but this is outside the urban service area, so it's just creating another problem, especially if you're going pretty far outside the urban service area.
But isn't it also true that a fire hydrant is approved on this site, which will connect to the water main?
I don't think so, if it's outside the urban service area.
No, a fire hydrant is approved for this site that'll connect to the water main.
No, that's not correct.
Oh, wait a second then. Stan, you and I had this discussion, and our site plan shows it, I believe.
Yeah, sheet C6 shows a connection to the fire line to the water main on 66th Avenue. It's a connection for a hydrant and a service connection into the building for a sprinkler system.
Right. And you're saying tonight that the fire hydrant is not approved either?
That's correct. Right, because it's connected. In other words, there would have to be a dry hydrant situation. The alternative would be a dry hydrant situation.
Well, then that is...
They have a hydrant all along 66th Avenue in the right-of-way.
Correct.
And that...
Yeah, that fire hydrant...
If it's in the right-of-way.
Right, that fire... I understand that, right. That fire hydrant in the right-of-way along 66th Avenue will serve this site.
Oh, that's correct.
And it's connected to the water main.
That's correct, but that's in the right-of-way.
Okay,
Yes.
but if a fireman shows up at this site, he's going to connect to that fire hydrant, which is connected to that water main, and he's going to use that water to fight a fire in this building.
That's correct.
All the church is asking for is to connect to the same water main, to connect its sprinkler system, so that in the event there's ever a fire, the sprinklers will come on with a pressurized, publicly maintained line to fight the fire. That's the only reason we're here. Now, why does the church care? There's two reasons. The publicly maintained, pressurized water main is more reliable than digging. You'd have to dig a 6 or 12-inch well. You'd have to provide a pump. You'd have to provide a backup generator. All of those have to be maintained. The cost to the church, over and above what it would cost them to connect to the water main, is a little over $30,000. So we're talking, there's a $30,000 difference, and then there's the continued maintenance. And the second reason is, I don't agree that provision of potable water service applies to a fire line. We're not asking for potable water service. The church is on a separate well and a separate septic tank. They're not asking for potable water service. They're asking for fire line service. I think people have a right to expect common sense decisions from their government. Can I have that sketch up here, please?
I need more of the mouse. I don't put it on I haven't had that remote mouse for this area.
Oh.
Do you want to get out of this?
Yeah.
Well, we could put it on Elmo if we can't get it up there.
Adam said he was going to. Does he have a way to bring it up from the screen in the back?
Do you want to put that on the...
Yeah, we've already downloaded this to the. Adam actually put it on the computer, this system before.
Do you know what he has it under here?
No, he actually.
Let's just use Elmo. I can just use that. That's if you help me out with that. Yeah, that's fine. As I said, here's the existing water main going down 66th Avenue. Here's the church site. Here's the proposed.
Very hard to
Get you back to the mic, please.
I'm sorry? It's a technical difficulty.
Okay.
Yes. Got to be able to hear you, Bruce.
All right, I'll speak louder because I can't get to that mic from here, and it's really not going to come over this way.
You're coming up now.
But you see the existing water main, you see the proposed fire hydrant, you see the church site. This is 66th Avenue. Here's the urban service boundary. I do think that if you're going to permit the water main to be used for the fire hydrant, then you've already interpreted this policy that it's something more than just potable water. We're not asking for potable water service. We're asking for exactly the same service as the fire hydrant is getting. It's going to serve exactly the same fire. The people coming out to fight the fire are going to use exactly the same water. And it's probably never going to be used. I mean, I don't mean to pun, but God willing, it'll never be used. It's just to fight fires. And if you're going to tell, you will not be able to convince the public that it makes sense to make them pay an extra $30,000 for that. You won't be able to do it. And I would hate to be in your position if you attempted. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Barquette. Are there others in the audience that would wish to speak?
Good evening. Aaron Bowles, NBV Engineering, 2455 14th Avenue. I wanted to address some of the issues regarding our supposedly sneaking in the fire system into the plans. Yes, we did acknowledge the fact that water and sewer wasn't available on January 14th. That was the last TRC response we had, and we had no intentions of connecting to it. February 17th, the architect had come to us and said, by the way, we need a sprinkler system in the building now. Okay, fine. We had called the utilities department, talked to them, discussed our situation, talked to them first of all about the fire hydrant, said can we put a fire hydrant on our property so that one, we can eliminate the dry hydrant system in the rear of our property. They said no problem, we've got fire hydrants up and down 66th Avenue, even though it's outside their urban service area, it's for maintenance, so we don't have a problem with that. Fine, so we did that. Somewhere in the interpretation, and there was no ill intent or no sneakiness, our interpretation of being able to provide fire service for our building, we at that time installed or drew up the fire connection to the building. We were already allowed to do the fire hydrant to where we had it, and we just extended that fire line into the building. Again, there was some discussions back and forth with the utilities department on this, and they were in agreement with it. So between that submittal back and forth to the county and the back and forth submittal between engineering and traffic and planning, that fire line was on there. Well, our final submittal on April 16th had the fire line in there, had the fire hydrant in there, and it was signed off on April 17th. So as far as we're concerned, we had full approval. The utility construction permit was not listed on the cover sheet just because it was a simple omission, because we didn't have it on there all along, not anticipating it. For our pre-construction meeting, once it was signed off, the contractor was ready to go, we had a pre-construction meeting, we called Jesse, said, hey Jesse, you going to be there? And he goes, I'm sorry, Jesse Rowland from the utilities department. And he, at that time, said, yeah, we can be there, but I don't remember there being any utility construction permit for this project. And that's where he had talked to the planning department, and that's how this whole thing escalated. So there was no deceit intended on our part. We had gone through with what we thought was right and what made sense, and it was approved, and that's our position. And I can answer any questions if you have any.
May I ask Mr. Bowles a question?
Sure.
Aaron, what happened between your letter of January 14th and the architect or somebody telling you on February 16th that you had to have a sprinkler system?
It was just the architect's design. The architect had been working along with his plans, and between him and his MEP, his mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineer, had determined that they needed a fire suppression system.
Is that to satisfy some code requirements?
Yes.
Okay. And that was not known in January when the site plan was submitted?
That's correct. And we didn't have it on the plans, and we didn't intend on using one at that time.
What was it that changed from the plan that you had submitted earlier and the mechanical engineer, plumbing, electric guy stating that you had to have a sprinkler system? Was there a code change or something that required that, or it just have not been called in the engineering phase?
I don't know all the details of that, but my understanding is, there's different options for either putting in and not putting in a fire suppression system. One of the options is putting in multiple hour fire rating walls and just beefing up the rest of the material on the in the building. I don't know that for sure, but I know there's options for that, and I think the option they had opted to go with was putting in a fire suppression system. So I don't know how they got to that point, but on February, we're noted by the architect that we need to have that.
Let me ask you a question. You're a civil engineer, correct?
Yes.
And you presumably at this point, or maybe earlier than this, had read Section 5.7 of our comprehensive land use plan that deals with potable water and sewer restrictions, particularly.
No.
But have you read it since?
No, I've read it since, but I did not read it before that.
Let me ask you a question. Do you feel that that is sufficiently clear that it can only be interpreted in one way to preclude fire line service outside of the urban service district, or do you believe that, or when you read that as a civil engineer, is it less than clear for you?
I think it's less than clear. I mean, if you could interpret it many different ways. And our interpretation was potable water is drinking water. And when somebody says to us that you can't connect to a potable water line, that's to us saying you can't use it for drinking, and you can't, we can't connect to sewer either. And we acknowledge that. We're not trying to connect a potable line, but for fire, yeah, we believe it's different. And while I'm here, I might as well go ahead and ask if the board is looking to allow connection for potable drinking. I know that had come up a few times from different board members, but we'd love to have the approval to connect in for drinking water. But that's not what we're here for. But if somebody wants to make that an addendum, we'll take it.
One thing at a time. Let me ask a question, Stan or Mr. Wills, to respond. At what point, when the line appeared on the plans, was there a response from staff to Mr. Bowles saying that that would not be allowed?
Yeah, I'm not sure when the lines appeared on the plans. I don't have earlier versions. I just have the approved plan set, and staff does review that. Generally, what happens is, as you might know, plan sets are many pages thick. And there's a lot of details in it, and there's initial site plans, and there's more details. And C6 is one of those sheets that is specifically for the fire line connection. And it's consistent with the rest of the site layout. It's just another layer, essentially. And what typically happens is, staff looks at its comment. Each department personnel come in and look at the revised plans that are on the table, the site plan table. They look at their comment, they look at the response, and then they check the parts of the plan set submittal that apply to the changes that are indicated there. And I don't know when C6 came in. I think Aaron has a better memory of when that was resubmitted and so forth. And it obviously wasn't caught.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I agree with that. The utilities department reviews their last set of comments. No water and sewer connection available, and they just signed off on it. Unfortunately, in between that time, I had been talking with the utilities department, and they had acknowledged that fact that, yeah, you can connect for a fire hydrant, and, my interpretation was fire hydrant / fire system, and when we submitted it based on that, it was approved. And that was in April. The first time that it came up that it was a problem was when we were looking to have the pre-construction meeting, and that was October the 7th, 8th, or 9th, right in that range. I think Bob had started getting involved about October 9th or 10th, somewhere in.
Can I comment on that? We never actually issued the permit with that. And I don't know who you talked to that said you could install a fire hydrant and connect to the connector fire system to the system, but it was never issued as a permit.
That's correct.
And so we didn't approve it officially. I mean, I don't know where Aaron's getting the idea that it was approved. It was never approved. So,
I think what he means is the site plan was approved.
Yeah, the site plan was approved.
The site plan was approved, but I mean, utility.
I understand there are additional steps, but the site plan was approved.
Because I think what happened was Jesse, he didn't really look at it really close when he was signing off on the site plan, because he just assumed, he said, it's outside the urban service area, I don't really need to look at it. And then he didn't really look at that was in there on there. And then when they came in for utility construction permit, he said, what are you doing? This is outside the urban service area. And they said, well, it's on the site plan. They said, no. Look back on the TRC comments, and we said that you can't extend water and sewer outside the urban service area. And that's when the debate started.
Right, but
I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Sure, go ahead.
George. If this was in the urban service area and they were hooking up for their fire suppression system and for potable water access in the building, would it be two separate lines?
Yes.
So they'd have, from the main, they'd have to run a potable water line and a fire line that's potable water.
That's correct.
So they'd have two separate systems.
What they do is they protect the fire line from the potable water system with a double detector check valve, so that prevents any kind of contaminants from back feeding in. And I'm sure they were going to do that in this situation, but that's correct. And we try to always prevent any kind of long extensions in that might remain stagnant, that doesn't get flushed out or anything like that, as we were mentioning before. And so that's what I was concerned. I couldn't really remember how they had this designed, but I was concerned about a really long extension that could harbor some type of contaminants from stale water.
Yeah, I think there's a way out of this. I really do. I think this is a mess, and it got messed up, and everybody had the best of intentions, and it was a mistake, and there were some misunderstandings, and I think Section 5.7 is less clear than is ideal. And I think there's a way out of this, and here's what I would propose. We have a golden, I think the downside for the county, I mean, justice is probably, and the safest thing is to allow these people to do it, but the downside for the county is that we set a precedent that we don't want to do on the urban service boundary, and that is legitimate. But we are rewriting our EARs right now, and they are going to be adopted this summer by Tallahassee. We have an opportunity to accept the argument that 5.7 was not drafted as airtight as we all intended it to be. And we could just accept that and say things got messy, everybody had the best intentions, let these guys go forward, correct the language in the EAR so that it's clear that it absolutely prohibits that, and there will not be any precedent. We'll never have this problem again. People will not be back and be able to say, you know, that this happened before and I want to be under the same thing again. And we can put this to bed and let the right thing happen, and the county's protected against having a precedent being set.
I may agree with part of that position.
Your mic's not on, Dan.
As I said, I may agree with part of Sam's position. I don't find the policy confusing. I think it's pretty plain. I don't think that anywhere in the comp plan or the LDRs there's a definition of a fire line that is separate from a potable water line. There is only a potable water line. That is, a fire line is not a different set, it's a subset of potable water. So I don't think it's very confusing. I do think that it's confusing to allow a fire plug in the right-of-way
you can't use.
That you can't use. And that's a little confusing to me.
Well, I can address that too. We always do that, even if it's outside the urban service area, just mainly to, in case there's an emergency, car wreck, to help, to fight car fires and stuff like that, mainly.
Sure.
So, I have a question of George Glenn, just for a second. The difference between quasi-judicial and quasi-legislative. We're not supposed to be rewriting any of the...
No, in fact, it's a very strict...
the laws here.
Right. It's a very strict reading. Courts won't give you a lot of leeway on this. They'll read the code in its plain language to get an interpretation. So, correct. If you feel that the language is clear, you need to follow it.
Thank you.
A couple of things. I think I tend to lean toward what Sam's talking about, in the sense that this is, if you read it clearly, then you have no choice in your appeal. If you say that there's the 5.7 is not clear, then item 4, did the reviewing official evaluate the application with respect to the comp plan correctly? In his opinion, he did, but if you do not agree with that, then that is the answer for not allowing the appeal, or finding in favor of the appellant, however it is. But more importantly to me, Mike, I don't understand. I'm just curious, if we follow something like Sam's talking about, and whether we grant this tonight or not, and we rewrite the EARs, would we be better off allowing, and I'm going back to this thing on the public facility church, because I'm thinking in terms of 5.7, really controlling more residential and development than I am, because this church is a gray, I'm telling you, every time the churches come up, we get in a gray area. Now, are we better off as a county to allow them to hook up to this, or force them not to because of our rules? So I'm not, if we rewrite it, I'm not opposed. If you've got a fire hydrant within X amount of feet of a piece of property, why wouldn't we allow them to run the fire line in? From a common sense standpoint, what does that hurt us as a county? It doesn't encourage in development that I can see. If you specifically say a church fire line, which entails rewriting the EAR for that purpose.
I'd probably rather let community development address that.
I figure I'll get Bob. Bob's got a red sweater on. We'll let his face match it, and come on. We're up here. Come on down, Leroy.
Actually, I knew that would be a target.
I knew and we've been here before.
I didn't want to wear a white one because it might get bloody. But I want to tell you, you might solve this problem, but let me tell you where we didn't allow connection to the system. Down where Church of God is, the next parcel over to the west was approved as a retreat.
That's correct.
And, then you'll get to making an exception for a retreat, and then you'll come to the next exception, I think what happens is, the way development has occurred in this county, we sometimes need to put major mains, water mains, through the non-urban service area to get from one part to another. And if you allow connection all through that line outside the urban service area, I think, as I said before, what you're doing is you are making that area urban. You're making it have the characteristics that the property owners could come in there and make a logical case for it.
I don't think my idea would do that, though. If you made exceptions for churches or certain uses, but my idea, where we accept their argument, but when we shut the door,
tighter than mine. Yeah.
That wouldn't. What would be the precedent that would be set there? It would just be clarifying that this is what we really intend.
Well, that also assumes that you modify later. I mean, if the same language stays in the comp plan, then that precedent stays.
If the same language stays in the comp plan.
So you're also assuming, though, that you would modify the comp plan at some point in the future.
I'm saying the two would have to go together.
But we only have this language to work with.
Council?
Yes, sir.
But our vote cannot be affected by our thoughts on rewrite.
No.
Our vote has to be based totally upon
This is quasi-judicial.
the issue as presented.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, may I say something?
Certainly, Mr. Barquette.
I will assure you that this provision is not crystal clear. I read it and I said, they're not asking for potable water service. I read it to Will Collins. He said, they're not asking for potable water service. It's not crystal clear. Aaron Bowles didn't think this applied to them. I'm here tonight to tell you we're not asking for potable water service. The prohibition is against provision of potable water service. We aren't asking for that. We've got our own potable water service. We've got a well. So to say that it's crystal clear is not accurate. As I said, the county attorney agreed with me, and I just read it straight. And he said, you're not asking for potable water service. I don't see where it applies. So I do not agree that it's crystal clear. More importantly, I like Commissioner Zimmerman's solution. I don't care how you get there. You can't tell me that if you're going to... Well, actually, let me just put another proviso in there.
More pressure, Bruce?
Well, if you're going to tell me that it is crystal clear, then you can't have fire hydrants. Then you cannot have fire hydrants because that's not potable water. I mean, that's what you're saying, but you do allow fire hydrants. And it's, as Mike said, for emergencies, because that's what the public health, safety, and welfare demands.
May I ask Mike a question? Sure. Mike, one of your concerns was that the dead-end contaminant bacteria from the dead-end hookup backing into the potable water line. Is there some system that would prevent that?
Well, they do have a double, if it's a sprinkler system, they usually put a double detector check valve on there. And the only thing is, there is still a small section, which is probably pretty negligible, that could still cause a kind of a stale type system. in there that could potentially harbor some bacteria and algae. But if it's not very long, it probably won't be that much. The only way they can prevent it is by flushing it out on a routine basis, and very few people do that, that have sprinkler systems, unless they check them on an annual basis.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, just to further address the end of the line, this hydrant is going to be, on our property, is going to be a county hydrant, just as every other hydrant along 66th Avenue is a county hydrant. And we provided an easement that the county accepted for that fire hydrant. And part of the Utilities Department's operating protocol is to go through once a year and flush these hydrants, open them up, get rid of the bacteria that may be built up in there just to keep these hydrants fresh. Immediately following this fire hydrant is where our double detector check valve is, which prohibits any type of back flushing into the system. So it's under the county's current operating protocol, there shouldn't be any bacteria buildup in our lines. And
I have another question.
I'd just like to take this opportunity to point out that Aaron used to be an engineer with the County Water and Utilities Department.
I have another question for Mr. Bowles.
Then he should have known.
Okay. There is a county hydrant in the right-of-way.
Correct.
You are asking for another hydrant to be closer to the building?
No.
Is that what I see on that plan?
There is a county hydrant immediately south of our property in the right-of-way. Our proposed hydrant is on our property, a certain distance, maybe, I don't know what that distance is, but it's within our property, and we provided an easement for that hydrant. And the purpose of us providing that or installing that hydrant where we had put it was so that we could eliminate the dry hydrant in the back of our property. And based on that proposed hydrant, the fire department had reviewed it and said, based on that hydrant, you can remove your dry hydrant system, and that's exactly what we did. So that dry hydrant system that we have to put in there, we've already ripped it out.
So what would the cost difference be if you did not go with the sprinkler system and just use the fire hydrant?
Well, we can't.
I don't understand, so I would...
Yeah, there's a fire hydrant which provides means for the fire department to drive the fire trucks, hook into, and spray. The fire suppression system is an alternate system such as these that once they get activated, they immediately start spraying out water, put out fire before the fire department
Let me just clear. It's not an alternate. You have to do the fire.
That's right.
It's not alternate to the fire hydrant. You have to have both.
Right.
You have to have the sprinkler system.
Correct.
To meet code.
Correct. That's when the architect, in February.
I thought there was an alternative to using a
There is alternative connecting the county water system. They can have.
Correct.
There are other alternatives to sprinkling the building. You could dig a well, a 6 to 12-inch well, pipe it, man it with a pump and a standby generator, and that's where I said the extra $30,000 would come in.
Create your own pressure.
Okay. Thank you.
Stan, when plans are submitted, such as these, and it's found that there is a mistake, one side says it's a mistake, the other doesn't, I understand that. But is there a request for those plans to be resubmitted without that, in this case, without that fire line on it, or is it just a letter of documentation that's sent saying that the connectivity is not allowed?
Yeah, a lot of times you can do plan changes in a number of ways. You can have a sheet eliminated. You can redline through it. You can do it by letter and document that sheet's void, that sort of thing. The site plan is kind of the overall look at the project, but all those individual permits are the things that actually allow for construction to proceed, and that's a whole other step in the process. But yeah, where there's a mistake on a plan or a plan needs to be amended, it can be done a number of ways.
Mr. Bowles, when you realized that that line was not going to be acceptable by staff, is that when you then approached the church with the thought that possibly they needed an attorney?
The point where I decided that we needed an attorney was when we had worked our way through the ranks and talked to various department heads, and when Bob's final determination was that we can't hook into it. That's the bottom line. That's it, and that was it. So
that was in October.
That's when I said I've gone as far as I can go.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, that started in October. It may have gotten to that point. I'm not sure when Bruce got involved, but sometime in October, beginning of November.
Can I make a shot?
Other questions? I'm sorry?
Want me to make a shot at a motion?
I'd like to hear the audience. Would that be okay, Don?
Oh, fine.
Are there others in the audience that would like to speak to the issue?
He needs to be sworn.
Okay. Can you identify yourself, please?
Frederick L. Lipford at 7905. That's the property just southwest of this church. Personally, I mean, I'm just going to pretty much speak my mind, because I think sitting here and listening to all of you, Mrs. Key comes up with dates. You just asked a very important question. The first time this building permit was issued, we dropped the ball. When I say we, I pay your salary here, everybody else is here, and for some reason we totally just leave. What do we do now? I'm not sure if every one of you here tonight, and I want to show of hands, how many of you knew they only were looking for fire protection? I wonder how many knew that that's all they were looking for. No potable water. Because he emphasized that. But Mr. Zimmerman is on my turf, because I'm kind of listening to him, because I'm going to be in that position that he's referring to, because I would always like to have potable water, because I have 12.5 acres and I run a business there. But if you read Law 5.7 to where it says no potable water is across the street from you, and I'm a county taxpayer, and granted, I know you're trying to protect the service boundary line, but there's a lot of room for improvement, because I kind of find it very unfortunate that we're here tonight, because it seems like everybody came here with a little bit different agenda, not knowing, I mean, for whatever reason. I think sometimes you do hash things out. But I am certainly interested in thinking that I would like to be able to hook up to that water line. I used to work for Indian River County Road and Bridge. I've flushed water mains out before, so I know all about that. But I find it unusual that what all of you have said, you're trying to discourage overbuilding, but I think when you look at each individual case, I think that needs to weigh in the part of it. If I contacted you and said, I'm going to build 30 homes on my 12.5 acres, you had the right to say, no, you can't do that. But I think if I called you up or applied with I was going to build a $300,000 house and my own property, I think that I should be given at least some leniency. Granted, we don't want to open no doors to whatever, but I think that when you discuss this again, I really would appreciate everybody at least. I'm not a God-fearing individual, but I think that you need to realize that you're talking about a congregation of people who are trying to just use their services, and they're not asking for a whole lot. In fact, I think it's kind of simple. And I can imagine having to put a well in, because God forbid you got to get a permit for St. John's, and contamination. As all of you know, if any of you have lived in this county like I have all my life, 62 years, contaminated water is right down the street from us, folks. The acreage. Contamination water. My property, it was a grove for years and years and years. And Mr. Hadman knows this, because we know all about the EPA if they come around a barn, don't we, Mr. Hadman? So all I'm saying is you need to realize that these people need, I would take it a step further and say, look, they need potable water, and I think they need fire protection. If you don't give them with the fire protection, that's a start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to clarify regarding our salary. We don't get a penny.
No, we don't get anything.
Nothing.
You get we get a privilege of some guy.
Peter?
Yeah, we get a good deal then.
Hi, my name's Peter Robinson, 315 Great Road. And
You may not be getting a penny, but Bob's getting all the money. So,
No, it's Bruce.
and he's the one that writes the rules, and that's what he's sitting here trying to defend right now is his rules. So, I think what you really got to sit and think about though is this. This is a church. It's a public meeting place. You're not going to allow them to have fire protection, but if it's a public school, if it's one of Mrs. Johnson's schools, she can get potable water and she can get fire protection. I mean, something's wrong in our community if we're not willing to allow a church to get fire protection. If they do have a fire at some point and somebody dies, it's going to be you all who killed them. And I don't think, that's just not the right way to do it. Bruce keeps talking about common sense. This is just common sense. And people are getting tired of regulations that get written and overrule common sense. And it's just impossible to believe that we can do that. Secondly, when they gave you the list of people who had potable water, they gave you some people on 58th Avenue. Some of you might know where Maitland Farm School is. They're outside the urban service district. They have potable water. They don't abut. There's property in between. It almost looks like that map that you had in the beginning. But they get potable water. So there's already been a precedent set. And I'm sure there's others if I go out looking. I just happen to know that one because I know exactly where the property is. And I remember when they put the potable water in. So there has been precedent set. And I just think it's important that we let common sense work. And then I think you really need to go back and look at 5.7 because this man's right too. He's a citizen of this community. And you're not going to let him have potable water? This all was done because we wanted to stop growth. Look, guys, growth's dead. We got 15% unemployment. Things are horrible. So if you like to keep it bad, keep all these 5.7s in. Let's make sure that people don't get good water. We spent a fortune getting all this good water made. I can remember in the old days when we didn't have good water. I can remember going to sewer plants when there were dead pigs floating around in private sewer plants. The world has changed. We've got the ability to give good water to people. Why can't we do it? And that's something you got to decide. Now, you can't decide that tonight, but you can do it next time when we work on the rules. Right now, I think you can decide that you can give these people fire protection because when I read that rule, I didn't see that it stopped fire protection. Bob sees it, and that's Bob's decision. But it's your turn, and you don't get the big salary. He gets the salary, so you can overrule him. It's your turn as citizens to protect the rest of us who are citizens and put some common sense into these rules. Thank you.
Thank you. There are, maybe I misunderstood, Peter, but there are other methods for fire protection other than this being requested. So it is available to the church as opposed to the potable water.
There are other protections, but I guarantee you when they go get their insurance, those other protections are not going to be as good as having county fire protection. That's a vast difference. Donna's in the insurance business. There's a big difference. Let's give them the best. I mean, that's what we should be looking for. We should be looking for the best for our citizens, not for second class. We don't need to put them back in the third world. Let's give them the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want me to make a shot at the motion?
If you want to. If not, I'll make a motion myself.
Okay. I make a motion that planning and zoning find that, number one, no, the reviewing official did not fail to follow the appropriate review procedures. 2, no, the reviewing official did not act in an arbitrary or capricious manner. 3, no, the reviewing official did not fail to consider adequately the effects of the proposed development upon surrounding properties, traffic circulation, or public health, safety, and welfare. However, on item 4, although the reviewing official did not fail to evaluate the application with respect to the comp plan, that we find there's some gray areas in the comp plan as regards hooking up for fire services only, and that we find in favor of the applicant.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. And just, I want to make sure, a positive vote will be for Mr. Barquette's appeal. Everyone understands that then? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Oh, discussion?
Oh, further discussion?
I just wanted to make a comment. So I
Oh,
had
I'm
to
sorry.
speak earlier.
I'm sorry. Sure.
I am a civil engineer, and I was not involved with the preparation of these ERIs, and maybe that's why I can see a little more confusion in 5.7 in addressing fire water connections than others of you that have kind of were covered in that. And because of that and the safety issue of a public area, if we clarify the ERI, I would think we should go with this.
Any other discussion?
It seems like to me, I don't have any problem with giving them water for fire, but I heard them say that they would love to have it, and I heard Peter say that if the line's there, let's give it to the people that are there. And granted, building is slow right now, but my concern is opening it up for a precedent where that $350,000 house should get potable water because the line is there, even though it's outside of the urban service area. That really concerns me. The idea that if we can give them this allowance for fire, can we do that and not expect somebody on that same line to come in and say we want the same thing or we want potable water because it's there, you gave it to them?
I think we could clean up 5.7 and clarify that. Yeah.
I think your motion makes clear that the reason we're allowing this to go forward is because 5.7 is unclear, and it's limited to that reason only. And if the county has a desire to make this precedent then they can revisit the EAR. That's not the decision we're making here. But I think your motion made clear, and we're all in agreement.
She says fire only.
It's about 5.7.
I seconded that motion because she said two reasons. One, she said fire only. Secondly, and this is going to be a discussion at some point in time, I think, Jenzy, that you've got a good point, but when we hit the EAR, I think that we're going to need to have the discussion about what Peter is talking about and about what we're looking at in this county, because times may have changed, they may not, but I think that's where we deal with it, not tonight. Yeah. This is a very specific case, and I think we let it go with that. Okay.
Anyone else? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Against? No. No. So it ruled in favor of the appellant, 6-1. Is that correct?
Yes. Good.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And now we come to the interesting part of the evening.
Can we have a break?
Mr. Chairman, can I be excused for a minute?
Been asked for a break for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Smoke break.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. That thing.
talk about this, or is it too late? Well, like, if we're gonna look at the EAR, we can talk about that outside. Shouldn't we be actually looking at the urban service area itself? Shouldn't we be looking at the urban service area itself, the line?
Let's redraw it.
We've done that. Actually, the staff did it and made the recommendation down 58 that got outdated. My buddy Jeff Bass will never talk to me again if we open up that whole can of worms.
Well, one of the things that concerns me, and I've seen it with like our landscape ordinances and any other ordinance, and we had somebody here tonight who used to work for the county. I knew that a fire line was potable water. This was very clear to me. How can, you know, he even said he'd never read 5.7. So, yeah, I mean, so here we have somebody that's in the development industry that's not even bothering to read our policy. Oh, well, you know, it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna submit it. You know, I mean, that to me is just, you know, why if that's going to be the case, why do we have policy? You know, why do we have these laws?
Let's do it. Be a lot more fun getting through this one.
P&Z meeting of February 11th, 2010 will reconvene.
Good evening. I'm Sasan Rohani, Chief of Long Range Planning. As you know, we are coming to you in the last few meeting and this meeting and the next meeting in a workshop setting for the evaluation and appraisal report based amendment to the comprehensive plan. And I apologize, a couple of slides you've seen before, I'm going to show it again, because if somebody at home looking at them, they know, what we are doing. But I'm not going to show all the slides, just a few of them to speak of these things. Tonight, there are 5 of the elements that you are going to take a look at them. Is a recreation open space, housing element, intergovernmental coordination, natural groundwater, aquifer recharge element, and stormwater management element. As you know, we have to evaluate our plan, which we did between 2006 and 2008. Our evaluation of the plan was approved, and now we are making sure to revise our plan that all the finding and recommendation of the evaluation and appraisal report now incorporated in our comprehensive plan. This is again one of the slides that you've seen before. Our evaluation appraisal report approved in February. We spend hours and hours of time to really revise all these plans, even though that when we make the presentation for the sake of time, we just scratch the surface. But believe me, lots of time and energy went to each of these elements. Again, you are looking at this in a workshop setting. We're going to come back to you in March for actual public hearing. After that, in May, we are going to the Board of the County Commissioner. Then we're going to send everything to Tallahassee. We will be back to the Board of the County Commission in August, and hopefully by then we would have the revised plan. Again, this was a schedule that we went through to bring everything to you, and we are here with 5 of the elements. As we mentioned before, just for the sake of our audience and the people that are watching at home, the entire element, each element is revised. The data and analysis section of each element completely revised, and all of these elements, they are in a county website for anybody who wants to take a look at them. However, the data and analysis section, we didn't show them as strike through and underline because, again, as I say, the whole thing is revised. However, the goals, objective, and policy, we show them as a strike through and underline for you and everybody else to read, to know exactly what we are changing in that section. For the first element that I'm going to review is a recreation and open space element. By the way, for each of these elements, we work with a different department in the county. For example, a recreation department and a public works department, they work with us in these elements. Unfortunately, none of them, they could come tonight because they had some other prior commitment, but they all reviewed and worked with us in this element. There are few new policies in this recreation element, and I'm going to just scratch and talk to you about few of them. One of them is they're going to look at the fee structure to make sure that if somebody from outside of the county they're using the facility, there is a surcharge for that one. Also, they are looking for the funding options that see what is available for them to increase the funding. They're going to look at and evaluate the ways to increase the revenue, such as facility naming, beach and park concession, and other one. Also, they are looking at the ways to subsidize anything that the people, they have to pay money to get to, like the pool or other facility, subsidize those things for low-income residents. Also, we have a policy that based on the availability of funding, they're going to make the improvement to the South County Park based on the Regional Park Master Plan. Also, we have a policy that by 2012, they're going to revise both the North County and South County Regional Park Master Plan. There is only one thing that's different than the evaluation appraisal report. At the time of evaluation appraisal report, we had an objective and set of policies for the cultural program and activities in the county. At that point, we were recommending to eliminate that objective and policy. And the reason for that recommendation was that the county itself was not responsible for many of those objectives and policies. There was like Cultural Council of Indian River County and other organizations that they were actually doing the work. And since we were not the responsible party, we decided to eliminate it. However, afterward, we talked to Indian River County Cultural Council and some of the other folks involved, and we realized that we really need to keep the Objective 9 for art and cultural programs. As you know, our county is a small county, but we are rich in culture, and we really, admire the art and so forth. And this is really a big part of the quality of life for our county. Therefore, we are keeping that objective, of course, renumbering change, and then also we are saying that by 2012, the county will have a comprehensive cultural plan. However, the Cultural Council of Indian River County is the agency that they're going to prepare that plan, and we are just going to help them. Also, there are policies under this objective that we identified what the Cultural Council going to do and how the county going to assist them. The Cultural Council of Indian River County, they reviewed these objectives and policies, and they happy with whatever we recommended. And actually we have somebody here tonight that could also, if they want, they could speak on that subject. But again, this was the only thing different that what was the recommendation of the plan, and we really think is appropriate, and we could again convince ECA that even though that we told them that we're going to eliminate it, we have a good reason now not to eliminate these objectives.
So, Son?
Yes.
I failed to mention before you started that this is a workshop atmosphere, and if there are members of the audience that would like to ask you a question or make a comment at that time,
exactly.
They just raise their hand, and we'd be glad to recognize them. Yes, ma'am. Please identify yourself.
Chairman Smith, Commissioners, I am Barbara Hoffman, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Indian River Cultural Council. I wish to speak to the Objective 9, Arts and Cultural Programs, Policies number 9.1 to 9.9, in the Recreation and Open Space element of the Comprehensive Plan. The Council thanks the Park and Recreation staff and the Committee for its EAR-based amendments concerning the Indian River County Cultural Council. The Council is prepared to enthusiastically assume the responsibilities included in the Park and Recreation element of the Comprehensive Plan. The Council thanks you for your consideration of these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
And just for sake of time and so forth, this is my presentation on the recreation element, and if you have any question or comment, I would be more than happy to discuss it.
Yeah, I've got a minor one, and I may have missed it, but I didn't see in here anywhere the gun range mentioned. And it's really minor, but it seems like that it's a facility that we would want to have recognized. Or maybe we don't. I don't know.
I do.
That came up. Is it in here or is it under another policy?
Again, I know that in the data analysis section, there is a mention of gun range, but you are correct. Maybe there is no policy referring to that one. Again, I could work with the recreation department and see if there is any appropriate way to include a policy supporting or something has to do with the gun range.
I'm not sure it's even listed as one of the resources in here for the county. I didn't see it. Is it?
Page 8.
There's a little something. Okay.
We didn't read as close as we thought, Sam.
I didn't read as close as I thought. It is listed. I have a very small thing, just a typo, just to prove that I did read this thing. On page 50, policy 6.3, it says by 2010 that they'll conduct a survey, but I'll point out to you that in the previous section where there's the text about it, it says it will be done by 2011. The dates do not match up. Then the other thing I just was kind of curious about, most of this is excellent, but on page 49, policy 5.1 and policy 5.3 have been stricken. And that sort of piqued my curiosity. Why have those, is there a specific, I mean, they seem sensible. I'm curious why they've been stricken, or if there was a specific case we ran into where...
No, again, the whole reason was that the county really doesn't have any control on the private facilities. Again, we are fortunate that we have many private, like pools, tennis court, basketball court, and so forth. But unfortunately, we don't have any control on their operation, if they want to keep it open, if they want to remove it, and so forth. And that was the reason that we removed those things, that the county didn't have any control over those actions.
I had assumed that originally was put in to protect the private sector against a competitor that had no profit motive whatsoever, but you're saying that's not the reason at all.
Yeah, but also we mentioned here that basically The people that they could afford, they always use the private facilities, like, the clubs and the fitness club and so forth. However, in the county side, we are trying to provide for the people with the lower fees that they cannot afford, those private facilities.
I understand. Thank you.
Any other questions? One down.
All right.
Okay, the next element that we are going to discuss is the housing element. Again, like the housing element, again, the main thing is that the housing production usually done by the private sector, and private sector is the one that they control the market and what they produce and how much they sell it. However, as a public sector, we always have to make sure that we assist very low and moderate income household. Just briefly, again, in 2005, as a definition of the affordable housing, if a household paid more than 30% of their income for the housing-related costs, then that house is not affordable. And based on the information in 2005, we have 13,577 households in the county in extremely low, very low and moderate income that they paid more than 30% of their income for the housing. And these are the group that, again, we're going to try to help them. As you know, the housing prices goes up and down, and when they go up, everybody has house, they are happy. The people that they don't have a house, they have a hard time to buy it. And when it starts going down, is the reverse. The people, they could buy the home, but whoever they own their own home, they don't feel any good anymore because they lost value. Also, there is a ratio of the home price to income that shows if the housing is affordable, is moderately affordable, seriously affordable, and so forth. And if you look for Indian River County till 2003, everything was affordable. Then we went to moderately unaffordable, seriously unaffordable. Then the prices start going down. And now we are back again to be affordable. Just for your information. Also, there is lots of assistance that we provide. And so far, over 4,000 units, one way or another, they got assistance through one of the programs that run by Indian River County. As far as the policies of the plan, I'm going to again discuss few of the policies. One is the policy 1.5, that the county is trying to establish a full web-based permitting process. That way then the people, they don't have to actually walk to the counter, they could do it over their computer as far as the thing that related to getting the permit and CO and so forth. Another policy is for eliminating delay for the affordable housing project. By the way that we do when affordable housing project come to the county, like the Habitat for Humanity when they're building subdivision and so forth, actually they're going to come to me and I'm sending a memo to all the reviewing department and ask them to put that project ahead of all the other projects to make sure that they are expedited. There are two other policies that we are expediting the permit. One is for any project that they use the new construction technology and the green building and so forth. Again, we would like to expedite those and support those projects. Also, if there is a project near the transportation hub, major employment center, or a mixed-use project, we would like to support those type of the project too. We had several new policy that if there is any non-profit housing organization that they want to create community land trust, or if they want to create a community development corporation, a staff could assist them and help them to create those organizations. Also, there is another new policy that we would like to assist, a big employers, the private or non-private, Piper or hospital or whatever, if they would like to set up some employer assistant housing project, that the people that they work for them, they could get some assistance, but when they get assistance, then they make some commitment to stay with that firm or that organization for some certain period of time. Also, we are planning to create a new private public housing trust. We have a trust fund that the county SHIP program and the other program, they have their own trust fund, but this is a separate trust fund that if there is any donation for the affordable housing and so forth, could go to that trust fund and be used for, again, assist the very low and moderate income to either as a down payment closing cost buy a home, or if they own their own home, they need fixing, then we could help them to rehab the home.
Can I ask a question
Yes.
on that? Is there a ratio? I mean, if somebody donates to this fund, does the county match it in some way?
We haven't set up all the requirement yet. Now this is the policy that we're going to do it. Exactly how we're going to do it, we don't know yet. But we have to, again, by the ordinance, setting these up, and then we have to spell out how it's going to work.
We're talking about the private public housing trust fund thing?
Yes.
Because when I read that on page 43, I got to tell you, one thing that jumped out at me says, first, a revenue source must be dedicated to the trust fund or other obligations. And it says, for example, developer extractions that create revenue must be established. Here's what I think that means. I think that means that a young couple that saved up enough money to make a down payment on a house, a new house that they're going to buy from a developer, that developer is going to be taxed by the county to have this go into a trust fund. He's going to pass it on to them, and the cost of their house is going to go up so that somebody, so that money can disappear somewhere in the social policy goal. And that sentence troubled me because, that just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Exactly. Like, as I mentioned, right now we really don't know where is the source of the money and how it's going to be used. These are all the things that we need to really iron out. But again, one source that we are talking about, and actually was the next policy that I was going to discuss, like we have some municipalities in the county. Actually, Roland, would you please switch it back? Like we have some municipalities in county like Town of Indian River Shores or Orchid that they could not provide affordable housing within their own cities because of the cost of the property there. Therefore, those cities, they could contribute to the trust fund. Again, there are several different ways. At this point, really nothing is set. We need to go through the process, establishing the process, creating the ordinance, and coming to you and go to Board of the County Commissioner to establish that.
I'm just saying, let me just read the language back to you. First, a revenue source must be dedicated. For example, developer extractions. I mean, I'm all for a private public housing trust fund, but when you have first, is the sentence, and then you have that afterwards, which I don't like that sentence at all.
I think that's a good point.
We need to remove the wording.
I think we should remove the, for example, developers extraction.
I mean, it's simple. That keeps it open.
That's good.
Okay. Any question regarding the housing element?
I have one question. One of the objectives, says Son, is that by 2020, the county will have provided paved roads, drainage facilities, and/or centralized water systems to at least 5 additional existing subdivisions currently without sufficient infrastructure. Do you have those 5 identified, or what is the criteria to become one of those 5?
No, we haven't identified yet. But again, as you know, through the assessment process, the county either pave the road in an unpaved subdivision or provide the water and sewer. Usually the people of the neighborhood, they come front and they said that they are willing to participate in the assessment project, and then the county would contribute to that project and they would do the assessment. At this point, we didn't identify which subdivision. But we are again hoping as an objective that we could at least, try to have 5 more subdivisions that currently didn't have the paved road or water or sewer, could have either all of them or some of them.
Okay. From my reading this, my assumption is that the county will have provided, in other words, at no cost to the homeowners themselves. So I think maybe that needs to be specified in there that you're looking for this to be reimbursed on an assessment basis.
Also, sometimes we apply for like CDBG funding. Like there were several subdivisions in the Wabasso area that we applied for CDBG funding, and then we provide paved road, water, and drainage for them.
Okay.
Again,
This is a gray area. I'd like to see that qualified a little bit then.
It really depends if we could get, the CDBG or other funding for very low and low income, because in those neighborhoods, in order to get a CDBG, the people that they benefit from it, they should be very low and low moderate.
Right, but let us change the wording, because it shouldn't imply that the county is going to provide it in all those cases. That's a good point.
Sistan?
Yes.
Don't even think about paving the roads in Summer Place.
They'll pay you to stay out.
Especially for free.
I have a free sewer hookup would be good, though.
On page 11, and this is tied in, there are amendments made to the zoning and the LDRs related to density bonuses and small lot subdivisions. And my understanding, this preceded me, obviously, my understanding was the idea that would provide an opportunity to provide more affordable housing, which obviously this whole document is about how we have a need for that here. How much of that has been built under those programs?
We've had several housing bonuses. Club at Vero, I think, is one on State Road 60. Was it Indian River Club or Kyle's Run? River Park Place and Kyle's Run. Those were all affordable housing density bonus.
Those are low-income housing tax credit properties.
All three of those were tax credit projects that did get the bonus.
And these LDRs have been in place for how long? These density bonuses and things?
Probably at least 10 years, maybe 15 years.
Yeah. The list is provided on page 15 and 16 of the element that could tell you the name of all the project and the number of the unit.
Right. I just see a certain tension in this document that we have a need for affordable housing, and we've identified that part of the solution to it is allowing more density in certain places on parcels, but it maybe hasn't been effective as we had hoped.
Well,
maybe
it gets to be controversial.
Highly controversial.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is acknowledgement that's
right. And it's not as easy as it reads.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
No way.
I see. Well, I know whose back that falls on to. People who can't afford housing.
Right.
Any other question regarding the housing element? Okay, if not, then we are proceeding to intergovernmental coordination element. Overall, through the intergovernmental coordination, we have to coordinate with many state, federal, and local agencies on a daily basis. And overall, the coordination is good, and we are coordinating with whomever we need to do to process the application, to get the grant funding, and so forth. One issue that we really identified in this intergovernmental coordination element was the annexation issue. With the annexation, there's two major problems. One, when developers, they want to come and increase their density, they don't get it through the county, then they would go to one of the cities and then try to get it from the city. Also, we have a plan for providing the water, sewer, and so forth, and then when all of a sudden a property being annexed to the city, they would also change those plans as far as, where to provide water and sewer and how much and so forth. Those are the two major issues, regarding the annexation. And again, I'm sure that you all know about, the major annexation that's happening, in some of the cities. However, currently the county and the municipalities, they are working to develop interlocal service boundary agreement to address the issues like annexation, density, and height. And hopefully, if that document prepared and approved, at least would give some blueprint for the future annexation and density and height.
Where are you in that process, son?
Actually, we've been working on it for about 2.5 years. Represented planners, administrators, and lawyers from the county and all the municipalities met. We met for about a solid 1.5 years. For the last year, it's been on hold until Fellsmere and Department of Community Affairs work out the final determination of their comprehensive plan amendments for the 18,000 acres that were annexed for the Fellsmere joint venture property. That's getting real close to being settled, and at that time, I assume we're going to go back and finalize the ISBA, and then hopefully it'll get adopted and be in place.
Do we have a target for that? I mean, do you really have a good feel for that? I mean, it's just dragging.
But actually about a couple of months ago, the county formally intervened in that process. The process is such that Fellsmere adopted its comp plan amendments. Department of Community Affairs found those not in compliance. So then the city and the state got in the administrative hearing process.
You're in mediation.
And have been in mediation since then. We just entered the mediation process, and George and I have been intimately involved in that mediation in the past few weeks, and I think it's getting close to being finalized. If there's a administrative hearing scheduled for March if they don't come to a equitable solution before then. So it should be resolved real soon.
Didn't you just do a presentation at DCA on that last month?
We had a mediation conference call with Department of Community Affairs, and county staff had sent in the issues that were a concern to the county, and that was really a principal basis of our mediation conference call. Okay. So it's getting close to being resolved.
Current economic conditions have reduced the pressure significantly.
Yes.
How did out of curiosity, I was trying to, with the plan, how did we get involved in that? I mean, why are we even involved in the Fellsmere
charter issue?
The reason I understand, but I mean, frankly, there is no intergovernmental agreement. Did the state ask for county input? Did our commissioners ask for it? Who asked for it?
I think the issue is we got notice that the administrative hearing on the non-compliance finding was being scheduled for January. We got that notice, I think, in November, correct, maybe. And at that time, we determined that it was coming to the end of the period, and if we, the county, wanted any input at all, we had to formally intervene. And
through the reason is part of the intergovernmental process is to try and get the coordination and cooperation in our from the cities within the county, because I mean they do have the annexation. They can take property away from us, so we need to be drawing them to us, not fighting it. So, I mean, and this appears to have gone backwards in a rub now. So
actually, there's been coordination through the process with the city. They let us comment on the proposed villages of Fellsmere comp plan amendment before they even did it. We provided comments, and they didn't address all of our comments. We provided comments on their transmittal proposed comp plan amendments. We provided comments at their adoption stage. So this is just a natural progression of the process.
Okay, that's fine. We've been drawn into the mediation, and it seemed like to me we should have done all that in the background, and we shouldn't have had mediation, I guess.
And we did.
Where you talked about annexation, and it's a little hypothetical, but who serves Grand Harbor with their water? The county?
Yes.
And so there's been talk about the city of Vero Beach annexing Grand Harbor. So if that were to happen, if the residents would want to pay higher taxes than they do already, it doesn't make sense to me. Would then the city take over those water lines, or would the county continue to provide water?
I think the county would probably continue to provide water, but that would probably be a negotiation that would take place between the city and the county.
Local agreement.
The annexations occur really regularly, small ones right at the border, and I think the two utility departments or two entities agree if there's going to be any change in the service areas.
I'm glad that topic came up, because on page 32 and on page 50, there are paragraphs that are very similar, and they talk about how the city of Vero Beach and the county have to resolve their differences about this. And it talks about the deadline, earlier, and it talks about the deadline being 2012. And obviously the citizens of this county have a great interest in how this is resolved. I'm okay with all of the language, but I would like it to be stronger. I would like to say that the county shall conduct the feasibility analysis and shall make a decision by the deadline of 2012 on what we're going to do. I mean, I don't want that deadline to come and get this. I want to kind of lock it down a little bit.
Actually, we do have the specific policy, but those are in potable water and sanitary sewer sub-element.
Okay.
We actually have a specific policy in those elements that we say the study is going to be done, and by 2012, they're going to make the decision.
Okay, well, that's good. That answers that question. But then it's also part of this sub-element as well,
This
since
is
it is
the
intergovernmental.
coordination,
And I don't see anywhere in the goals, objectives, and policies any statement about that. It's in the preamble, but it's not. There's no goal, objective, or policy to have a study and make a decision by 2012 about it. And it seems like there ought to be. It's a big issue. I mean, it's going to be a bigger one.
Again, we could, again, those policies that we have in those two elements, we could also include it in here too.
Thank you.
Okay. Next policy that I would like to bring to your attention is policy 1.12. I'm sure that most of you are happy to see this policy here. As you know, we had one case at the St. John. They bought some property, and then we changed the land use to conservation, and then later on they wanted to take it out of the conservation, and now we want to put a policy that we coordinate with the state that, again, if they purchase land for conservation, then they would not change it back to where it was.
And I think we probably want to change that just to add without the concurrence of the local government. So.
We're in there, one thing, just to go, not to rehash that, but I don't believe the problem was we didn't ask them either when we changed them. Don't we need to ask them before we change their zoning or their land use? I mean, we did kind of forget to ask.
Maybe.
I understand.
That may be their requirement. That doesn't mean it's ours.
They may find another legislative bill up there that says don't ask, don't tell, or something. But
actually, we're getting along a lot better with St. John's.
I noticed it.
And they are going to let us designate the conservation property that they got from Fellsmere joint venture. It'll be part of the new 10,000-acre reservoir.
Also, whatever I have here is an abbreviated portion of the policy. If you read the entire policy, it would say unless the land sale is approved by the local government in whose jurisdiction the land is located. Actually, these are the language that Bob himself wrote. The next one is, again, whenever there is a project, utilities department, they have to look at it and make sure there is sufficient potable water and sanitary sewer to support that project. St. John, and we have these policies in our potable water and sanitary sub-element. However, St. John, they said they would like it to also be in our interlocal coordination element, and that is the reason that we have policy 2.4. Again, this is the same thing that we're always doing now. We have it in the intergovernmental coordination element. Also, if the project is in the city of Vero Beach, Since we are the one that we are issuing the building permit for both county and the city, we need to coordinate with the city, make sure that they have sufficient water to support that project. The same thing. Also, we are going to coordinate with the St. John on anything that has to do with the water supply assessment. And they're doing lots of activities and so forth, and our utilities department, they are involved with them. And that is for the intergovernmental coordination. Any question? If not, thank you. And then Roland and Andy, they work in the next two elements.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay.
Thank you.
We keep rolling here long enough, he might smile.
No way.
No.
Thank you. I'm non-smiling Roland DeBlois from Environmental Planning and Code Enforcement, also Senior Environmental Planner. Andy Sobczak's here also, who's worked on these elements. I'm going to go over two elements. Briefly, first one is the natural groundwater aquifers recharge sub-element. Just some basic background, which most of us know, but there's essentially two main aquifers in the county. There's the shallow aquifer, which is divided by a confining layer, and then we have the Floridan or deep aquifer. And in the county, we have essentially three main areas of primary recharge. We have the Atlantic Coastal Ridge, the 10-mile ridge out by 95, and then west of Blue Cypress Lake is the portion of the Florida Ridge, Florida aquifer recharge in our county. With respect to primary recharge area protection, we've made some progress over the past several years in acquisition of conservation lands on the Atlantic Coastal Ridge for protection. The Sand Lakes Tract, which was just talked about, which is now preserved partially by the county and St. John's, is a protection on the 10-mile ridge. And west of Blue Cypress, we do have low-density designation of 1 unit per 20 acres, which again somewhat contributes to protection of that resource or recharge area. A few trends that are reflected in the comp plan, which is a carryover from EAR findings. The trends are that there's per capita consumption is up, agricultural use is down, but it might change as we get into biofuel crops potentially.
Don't be taking our water away from us. We're keeping it.
That's ag talking.
From a regional standpoint in St. John's, there is an increase in consumption overall in the district, and it's expected to increase substantially over the next number of years regionally. There's 5 objectives in the comprehensive plan, and again, when we went through the EAR process a year or so ago, there's some recommendations to revise timelines and make certain changes. Just to touch on a couple of those objectives and policies, under sufficient aquifer quantity, we have an objective that's been revised through the date through 2025 to be no reduction in the availability of groundwater from the sufficient aquifer. A couple of new objectives that are going to serve that, policies that would serve that objective are the county adopting its own water conservation ordinance that would reflect what St. John's has in place. We haven't done that so far. We just let St. John's enforce it, but now we're looking towards the county getting into the act and assisting with enforcing that requirement. The other is, and again, you'll see some of these policies reflected in other elements, but one again is to look for an updated countywide hydrogeology study of the county. This gives a date for contacting USGS, and another element, we have a completion date, I think, of 2015. So this kind of goes hand in hand with other policies on that.
So that is
you have 2011. Is that just because we're halfway or starting into 2000? I mean, is it hard to contact them?
Well, that's to formally get into it, and I think when we had previous discussions with them during the mining, they referenced some costs that we need to be able to figure out how we would work with them on costs. So we could
take your time.
needs to be done.
As far as the fluoride aquifer quantity objective, again, there's an objective that there be no reduction in the availability of groundwater from the fluoride aquifer. And rather than duplicate other policies and objectives, there's a cross-reference, and this is particularly related to alternate water supply, and there's a pretty detailed specific policies in the potable water element that this essentially just reflects.
Is that where you hit the surface, trying to use surface water for potable water? Okay.
Right, just exploring different alternatives and to come up with a viable plan.
Roland, we went through, I think it was when we were studying sand mining, we had some experts in, we were talking about surface water and surface water connectivities, and we ended up with some more deep wells out of the Florida. And what effect will that 10,000 acre holding area west of in the West County have on deep water wells?
I think my basic understanding is, well, one of the first benefits to our county anyway is it'll essentially completely eliminate any discharge need to the C-54 to the lagoon. Right now, it's pretty much very rare that that happens, but it does happen on occasion. Once this is done, that'll virtually not happen anymore. Otherwise, I'm not sure how it might affect the deep well aspect. It's more of a regional flood protection and supply issue. In my
your recharge for deep wells are way north of here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Is that that's you're going to hit in stormwater management?
Yes.
After this.
But that as a water supply will not really be a consideration for connectivities for water use. We will continue to dig deep wells.
Actually, it's unclear. It could possibly be an alternative water supply source, but St. John's can't commit to that, giving us that supply until we actually need it. That's one of the issues there.
But if you read this, I read through this entire thing, and there's one sentence on page 8 that popped out. It's this is for the folks at home who might still be awake after this. According to estimates, water consumption in the district will increase by an additional 100 million gallons per day through 2025. And at that rate of increase, groundwater will not sustain district-wide demand through 2025. Mm-hmm. That's it. I mean, that's the answer right there. So it's going to be one thing or the other.
You got to go deep.
It's coming somewhere else.
Yeah. They had insinuated during some of the meetings that water was not going to be available for us to use. That's water that's going to be dedicated to
their system.
People north of us.
Correct.
No, Orlando is requesting, I don't know how many millions of
262 million gallons per day increase.
I was going to wait. You're going to hit this in the stormwater management, but that's why we're trying to. There's a move between South Florida and St. John's now to reconnect the system out here on 60, and a big issue within the citrus and ag community right now is water farming. I mean, we've been asked to consider, in lieu of them building big reservoirs, is storing water on is getting out of the citrus business. If you're our abandoned groves, because they're diked and you can hold water 6 or 7 feet, say 6 feet safely over a lot of acreage, and there's a huge amount of capacity, relatively inexpensively, that we could, we're looking at doing right now, and that's why you don't rule out the straw in the water, because you may find it coming from St. Lucie County up here rather than in St. John, and so we'll see. But it's slow to move. They've got a lot of time and effort in it, but connecting that reconnection out there is a huge political football, because as soon as it's connected, South Florida says they want water. And they're a lot shorter than we are up here. So, and that's how they're going to control that as part of the issue, I think.
And actually, you'll see water farming addressed in the future land use element that we'll workshop at your next meeting.
Which is something I wanted to be sure I was making. Stormwater, we've got it all built in, because this is potentially a big item for plus for the county as well. So,
well, there's permit applications, I believe, in Tallahassee for creating water utility, private water utility in Indian River County. Will that affect this?
Evans Properties is a big landowner statewide, and they have applications to the Public Service Commission to create 3 utilities in the state.
Much of which is misunderstood by a lot of people in this county, because it doesn't affect development whatsoever.
Well,
it's tied into the, I know a lot about it too, Bob, so it's tied into this water farming and how they're going to deal with the water on the property, and that's why before this county jumps into a lot of argumentative positions, you all better understand exactly what's going on before misinformation and therefore inflammatory language starts out and turns into a problem that does not exist.
Well, and let me just tell you, their application for this area is called Groveland Utility. That's what they're proposing. It's in 3 counties. They're proposing to establish this utility that will cover property in Indian River, Okeechobee, and St. Lucie County. We have talked to Evans Properties. We have been in negotiations with them. Their application to the PSC talks about providing water and sewer services to residential, commercial.
Correct. I've had an opportunity to go through the 1,000-page application.
I understand, George, but you all better go talk to them again.
A need is by showing supply to residential units. And we've met with Evans early on. We said we had no problem with the concept of water farming. Sounds great. And we're just trying to hammer out a settlement where that's something they can certainly proceed with, but anything that might lead to development that is contrary to our comprehensive land use plan would not be allowed.
I don't think that'll be a problem.
I don't know, Bob, if it would be appropriate at some time for you guys to bring in some experts for the commission and for this commission. I would certainly like to hear it, and associated with future water use in the state of Florida and how it would affect Indian River County. Because just as what George was talking about, I don't know anything about that at all. I do know that the Kissimmee chain is being raised to elevation 54 for South Florida for water use. That's the reality of how it's going to be used. So I'd love to hear something that would coordinate all of these issues associated with water use in the future and how it's going to affect us.
After we get through this whole ear-based amendments, I think we can get St. John's down here. I'm sure they'd be happy to come. And they're still working on their water supply assessment for this part of the district. They hadn't done a water supply assessment for the very south part of the district before, and they're finalizing that. And initially, Indian River County was going to be a preliminary water caution area. I forget the exact designation, but it looks like now it's not going to have that designation.
They've got us on a not water rich, but we're probably one of the better counties in the state.
Priority water resource caution areas.
That's St. John's.
Nice little acronym.
That's
Just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it?
So what
We
is
have
the
planned
acronym?
well, that's why.
And St. John's.
Okay, I'd like to, if there's no more questions, I'd like to move on to the next element.
Oh, okay. Well, I do have a question, and it relates to what you passed over, which was Objective 1, water quality. And I thought I don't know how George feels about this, but
we're not talking about the new rules, are we?
No.
No.
But I've heard some conversations about TDS and chlorides and the problems that people are in ag community are having with groundwater use for irrigation. And it seems to me that that's water quality, and there's nothing in here at all that addresses the degradation of the quality of the groundwater through saltwater intrusion. I mean, what is addressed is pollutants, and that's fine, but it seems to me that there's a gap, and that a very important one. Now, I don't know what specific
I don't know what you would
policies
do with it, but-
you might want to try to include to address this gap, but certainly something pertaining to the kinds of studies that the
one
Water
study that
Management
might
District
add-
has done.
Sorry to interrupt, but one study, that USGS hydrogeological study, one of the purpose of it is to do some regional or area-specific new information. I mean, the one that we have now was done back in 1988, and certain geological information is not going to change, but what is changing is, what has changed is the use, consumptive use aspect. And if there's any particular area where there is a contamination or chloride issue, then this would be an opportunity to look at those through that study. I mean, that's
Right.
an aspect.
I'm just wondering whether, rather than kicking the can down the road, there might be a way to address and use I know St. John's every 5 years has been doing an update on their hydrologic models of Indian River County for the groundwater, and has targeted the southern part of the county especially as an area of, I don't know that they'd say concern, but
Oslo Road.
yeah, Oslo Road, where this South County well field and where the city is getting a lot of water, that some of the results from those studies might point in a direction that could yield some policies that would address this unfolding threat to the quality of the groundwater.
What works both ways is part of the issue is the protection of the groundwater for use in agriculture. The other has to do with when you recycle, you go into management ponds, and then it's maintained. You have to, the water quality as it goes back into the ground. If you've got the poor water quality coming up, most rules require close to potable water, which is actually better than what you're getting, and so you get caught in a catch-22. Your water use, you can't clean it up enough, and you stay. We fight that all the time too.
And well plugging is another.
I don't know how that affects the
another
county,
issue that
St.
could be
John's
addressed in that objective one as well.
And I know we address
You
well
do address
plugging.
it.
We do have it, it's just not under that particular.
Right.
We could cross-reference it, because you have a good point, it is a water quality issue.
Let us take a look at that. You've got a good point. Whenever the county puts in wells, we have to do detailed analysis, and St. John's looks at it pretty closely, or DEP, I'm not sure which. But they do look at saltwater intrusion and other impacts of that.
And also, by the way, DEP does consider Indian River County a water resource caution area. They have a website that has a map that shows us as being as a water caution area.
For what reason?
It doesn't say.
Roland, before you move on, I have a question about Objective 5. By 2015, the county shall protect a minimum of 100 acres additional, 100 additional acres. Is that enough? I mean, how was that number come up with? I mean, we're
I
talking
had that
about
same question.
something that's going to be very strategic and important in the next few years. It seems like if we're looking at storing water and recharging water, that at 5 years is 100 acres minimum going to be enough?
I think we run into this a lot. We try to make sure our objectives are quantitative and have a time frame, because we're actually trying to set the target. What are we trying to achieve? And we're trying to make sure what we have is reasonable and that we can actually do it. And we don't have any money left in our land acquisition bonds.
The 100 acres could be 1,000, but it's a little more money.
I mean, we could set the sites higher, but it's just less likely. I mean, we're just looking at the practicalities. Of course, this was written really with focus on Atlantic Coastal Ridge. If it did include the 10-mile ridge, there's actually more opportunity for conservation easements through other means.
Actually, I was thinking about further out.
Yeah,
the inter-ridge.
The one out by.
Well, we can look at that and reevaluate.
I think that's a good point.
Sorry. I was going to say, let me tack on to that. You talk about the environmental lands program and if there's ever money available again. I mean, this ties into the 100 acres. Whatever I know a criteria is the water catchment. I mean, that should be a higher criteria. It should be, if groundwater is going to be gone by 2025 as a primary source.
How about 5,000?
And actually,
it should be a higher criteria, like 1 or 2.
And this really talks about the superficial aquifer. And actually, we use the Floridan aquifer as our potable water source for our centralized system. So really, the superficial is used for mostly private wells for individual houses that are eventually very little.
Which has to do with the distance, whether 10 mile really affects you closer where your residences are or not, and may not.
I have a question regarding policy 5.4 on page 16, which has been, I think, dramatically changed, and I just want to make certain I understand the intent here. It used to read, by 2000, the county will develop standard operating procedures for groundwater quality monitoring. Now it reads, the county shall continue to monitor water quality at county water treatment and wastewater treatment plants. Now, is that effluent after it's been treated, or is it the groundwater that we're monitoring? Because DEP requires them to monitor the potable water quality anyway. But what we're concerned about is the groundwater quality being monitored.
Was the first
to
policy,
catch changes.
was there a wider testing area?
Well, it was just targeted groundwater quality monitoring, and I think that if your intention is that, then it should say, shall continue to monitor groundwater, untreated, as well as perhaps the quality of treated water. I don't know if you want it to be one or the other or both.
I think it's groundwater. I think it was intended to be groundwater.
Okay. Clarification.
That's a good point.
You got to worry about the groundwater.
Yeah, but what's treated has all kinds of things you don't want to know. Treating.
Something you don't want to know.
Okay, the next element I'd like to talk about is the stormwater management sub-element. Just again, briefly, there's 2 main watersheds in the county. There's the Indian River Lagoon watershed and the St. John's Upper Basin. There are a number of other basins and sub-basins. We have the St. John's Upper Basin, the Talbot Terrace west of Blue Cypress, the water control districts, Sebastian River Basin area, and then the Indian River Lagoon mainland and Barrier Island basins. Just a few points that have been accomplished over the past couple of years. The drainage improvements in Rose and Gifford, Rock Ridge, and other areas. There's been a first phase of improvements in Bear Lake Estates for stormwater. We have the main relief canal water quality project that was recently completed. And something that's going on right now is FEMA is updating its flood maps for more accurate delineation of special flood hazard areas that the county's working cooperatively with FEMA on. One of the things that was found through the EAR process, and also it's reflected in this draft, stormwater management systems in general have been successful in providing flood protection in the county. A real test for that was Tropical Storm Faye in 2008. Relatively speaking, the county fared fairly well during that substantial flooding event. The other things that comes out is, nevertheless, there's still concerns about negative impacts of stormwater discharge into the lagoon and lagoon water quality. And there's always an opportunity to evaluate that and look for ways to improve water quality, as well as minimizing or reducing quantity of flow into the lagoon. This element has 8 main objectives, and again, based on the EAR process we went through a while back, there's a lot of revisions of target dates and some new changes to policies. I'm just going to talk about 2 of them. Under the recharge for the superficial aquifer, one of the things that's discussed is for the county to explore the feasibility of developing stormwater parks in the unincorporated county to recharge the superficial aquifer. there's a new fairly successful stormwater park in the city of Sebastian that not only helps for recharge, but it's success as far as quality treatment before it goes into the St. Sebastian River. There's potential opportunities to look at possibly next to some of the main relief canals, and this policy reflects that.
Roland, do you think it would make sense to incorporate that notion of stormwater parks and their location in the stormwater master plan? It's not mentioned in the stormwater master plan. Seems to me to be, as it's set out, to be more of a descriptive catalog of the basins and subbasins, and it's not really forward-looking document. It's less of a plan really than an inventory. Yeah. And I thought that this sort of, I'm not certain, had something along these lines been done before, back when Keith was first hired?
Pardon me?
When Keith McCulley was first hired and Ruth was agitating for everything, but I mean for stormwater master planning.
I don't think we've ever done a countywide stormwater master plan. There was
east of 95 was done.
There was one done for mostly the area around Vero Beach, the urbanized area, and this was done probably, I think, about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And the price tag for making the improvements was pretty substantial. But I think what we're talking about, Roland, is a countywide stormwater master plan, right? Right.
Well, I think stormwater parks and farming water are issues that really ought to be addressed in that kind of a document.
I was going to bring that up. Thank you, David. But within that, conceptually, Bob, and we don't need to go through everything, but you've got, like in 711, require surface water bodies over half acre. This is the last page, 48. This is in their objectives. We have to have littoral zone plantings. Somewhere in there, if you're doing water farming and it's a 200-acre area, we don't do littoral zones. I mean, just little stuff, you just want to be sure we don't nick ourselves as we go. So, I mean, just even a paragraph on it, we support or something, the concept that which would leave the door open without having to go through every item, and because you want littoral zones on most of your surface areas, but in some areas you may not.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff like that.
That littoral zone planning was not developed.
Right. We want to encourage this if we can in any way that we can.
Okay.
And I should say all my property's in St. Lucie County, so I'm unaffected.
This time.
I think it's a good idea. This time. That reconnect.
Put in where appropriate.
Right.
With the Indian River Farms, and this is at the risk of alienating friends and family, has there been any talk of them converting to a water improvement district instead of just a water control district, or is the county going to assume fixing the water quality in the Indian River Farms drainage district?
You step right into it, don't you?
Well, I mean, it's something we really need to look at. We started with Egret Marsh and Spoonbill Marsh. We're going to have to address the North Relief Canal and the South Relief Canal. So I mean, is this going to be just the onus on the county, or is the, I mean, it's stormwater, so we're talking about stormwater quality.
Well, we call Dan and ask him. Get Gunner on the phone.
David, yeah. And actually, I don't know the answers to your questions. Obviously, Sebastian River and St. John's water control districts have converted to improvement districts, and it gives them a lot more flexibility. Their mission is really expanded considerably. I haven't heard any talk for whether or not the Farms is thinking about doing that. And you're correct, the county has stepped up to the plate with the main relief canal system that we have right out here. and also Egret Marsh to actually work on stormwater quality in the farm's system. And we've got the brine treatment up at the Spoonville Marsh, and looking at doing something maybe down there for the South County RO plant with the South Relief Canal or someplace. So I don't think the county, I can tell you the county will not accept the responsibility for doing it, but it is incrementally helping where it can.
Nobody wants the liability.
Okay, just hitting on objective 7, which is related to stormwater quality. The county does have reference to water quality level of service within its LDRs. Essentially, we're looking to revise the objective to reference that when total maximum daily load information or standards are established for the lagoon, that those will essentially be the premise for regulation and controlling and regulating water quality discharge. A couple of the revisions or new policies related to this objective. Again, as I just mentioned, the first two just make reference to the TMDLs, or total maximum daily load references. We just talked about this, but about the littoral zone requirement, which we'll look at revising to make sure it doesn't conflict with things we don't want it to do. And again, Bob just mentioned that we are looking to have a policy to look for grants to do some filtration systems on the north and south relief canals, since the main relief system has been fairly successful. And that's the summary.
Roland, regarding the TMDLs, and I appreciate you're in this situation where everything is in flux, and you've done a good job, I think, of dealing with that with respect to the TMDLs. You may want to, if you haven't already, looked at the rule that the EPA just published in the Federal Register for the numeric nutrient standards in lakes and flowing waters, and they're going to be publishing a rule later in the year for estuaries, and flowing waters includes canals. That
we want a policy against that, right?
You may.
That whole thing is a nightmare.
You may want to include in your open-ended approach to this the need for addressing numeric nutrient standards.
Yeah, you better cover yourself. You can't meet,
because we don't know exactly how it's all going to shake down in terms of TMDLs versus just the absolute numeric standard that water is going to have to meet.
Paget Creek will not meet it today, and that's the purest water we have in the county.
Ooh.
So I'm telling you, this is, it's a nice
standard.
thought, but it's just something that this thing's way out of reach.
Well, we'll see.
And there's a huge municipalities. I mean, these hearings are full of people trying to soften this blow because environmentally it is very unrealistic.
George, out of curiosity, what meetings are you getting this information on? I'd like to know about these meetings.
They just had a hearing in West Palm Beach. The next one's going to be in another month.
There's a whole series of public
and
meetings
they started out with 2, and now they've expanded because of the outcry is huge.
Could we be made aware of these meetings on the website, county website or something?
Roland, I can send you the link.
Yeah, I do know that DEP has on their website a whole web page on the whole process. So
Florida is the first state.
Eric Shaw.
And and probably the toughest state.
Right, and because of the lawsuit, this was a settlement of the lawsuit that several environmental agencies brought against the state for not having pulled the trigger yet
on Everglades.
Right.
It's all tied to that, and it's
said 11 years is enough. Do it.
Yeah. And I mean, people sympathetic,
Clean water
we're all
acquisition.
empathetic and sympathetic, but I mean, it's just, it's the onus is not, this is kind of unreasonable.
How are we going to pay for this?
Spoken like a
Well,
true
that's-
member of the agricultural community.
That's right. We're here, boys. We haven't changed.
You gotta say
Drinks
that.
are on me. Let's adjourn. I was going to say, that sums it up.
Can't use the water, that's all.
That's the lobby.
What do you want? An agricultural economy or clean water?
82% of our water goes to ag in this county.
Don't forget that.
You have questions, Commissioner Rowland?
Thank you, Roland.
All right, thank you. Commission's matters.
I have a question for staff. January 19th Board of County Commissioners meeting, you brought up the fact that you wanted to change the resolution for the procedures for the purchase of rights-of-way. And the Board of County Commissioners asked you to go back and establish a priority for the 7 main road projects. My question is, over the last number of years, we have sold concurrency, we have taken impact fees, which means that we have agreed to do certain road improvements. We have had developers' agreements that have fallen through the cracks because the developers are either out of business, bankrupt, and so the developers' agreements have gone by the wayside. So we have this bucket of concurrency that's been bought, impact fees that have been paid, developers' agreements, and we're having to take out of this bucket certain concurrencies because they've expired, some certain developers' agreements because the projects never went through. How are we keeping track of what roads we have to build because certain projects have been built based on those improvements having been paid for and need to be made? How are we handling this?
That's quite a few questions. First, let me tell you.
Sounds like a workshop to me.
First, let me tell you, it was Public Works that went to the board. All of the staff was concurred with what they went for, but a resolution had been passed that specified how we had to go about acquiring right-of-way and when we had to pull the trigger and when we had to get into the condemnation process. And what we were finding is we're designing a whole bunch of roads, which was requiring us to go out there and initiate the right-of-way acquisition process and then the condemnation process. And we're finding that we're spending all of our money buying right-of-way and we're not going to be able to build roads. So this was actually a recommendation by staff for the board to modify that resolution to something that's a little more workable. So that's the reason that was brought before the board. Now, to get to the issue that you brought up, we really didn't approve any development projects that I can think of that were based on a roadway being built in the next 3 years and the capacity assigned to it.
We gave conditional concurrencies on most of those projects.
Yes, conditional concurrencies a lot, which just is a one-day snapshot in time. Now, a lot of we did take in a lot of impact fees for 5-year concurrency certificates, and a lot of them would have expired in the next year, except for Senate Bill 360, which the legislature passed last year, that gave an automatic 2-year extension if an applicant requested that prior to December 31st of this year, and most of those with 5-year concurrency certificates did. So that capacity that's been reserved is out there for another couple of years. But the good news is when traffic engineering did traffic counts this past year, we've got less economic activity, we've got fewer people here. We actually have people moving out. You know, the county lost population last year. Only, I think, 192 people, so something like that. But anyhow, volumes on the roads are going down. and have gone down. So that bodes well for concurrency in the near future. But we are looking at the prospect and the very high probability that the recession is going to end sometime, and development's going to pick up, and demand's going to come out there, and we are going to have to improve more roadways. But I think the whole thing that Public Works is going back to the board with those targeted roadways, and I think it's a strategic decision as to where we focus the limited resources that we have available in the next few years.
So it's not based on a need to build because impact fees have been paid to do that construction then?
In cases, we've identified a few roads where we actually entered into a prop share agreement, and those we are going to do, but those are only a couple of roads. But the roads that we are going to do we chose those based on several criteria. First of all, the need, where the volume is pushing up the level of service standards, doing those roads we have grant money for that will expire, and roads that are pretty easy to do where we have most of the right-of-way and the design done.
Okay. Thank you.
Be careful. Planning matters?
Just a few things. The next several weeks, you guys will have a lot of opportunity to keep doing some good work. At the next meeting, February 25th, we'll probably have the Cairns sand mine on. We'll know for sure tomorrow. You'll have the land development regulation amendments, and you'll have the land use element here for you guys to go over. And we think you all will sink your teeth into that one, and you'll probably have actual interested parties here to talk about several of the policies. Just to give you an example, this afternoon we were at the Ag Advisory Committee meeting. They were just looking at the policies in Objective 6 for agricultural protection. They spent 2 hours discussing it. It was great discussion, no agreement, and we're going to have another meeting on March 4th to go through just that objective. And if you guys, you're afraid, hey, I missed it, you missed the fun, it's on video. It's on video now, every meeting that's in that conference room in Building B, so you can go to the Ag Advisory Committee on the website and look at the video discussion. And that discussion is going on. So I think there's a lot of potential, based on what you guys give us, that committee. I think the land use policies, the draft that's going to be available, I think there'll be changes to that, as we go through. And that element I think is going to has the most kind of moving parts in it. And all that activity is going to be happening in the next few months. So,
could we maybe not have a major site plan, controversial site plan approval the same night you give us that?
Exactly.
Sand mine ain't gonna be easy.
Well, there aren't any people. Only one person.
Bob Ulovich.
One now.
That's enough.
How many other EARs do we have? I mean, could we bump the land to 2 weeks hence and move some of the easier ones up?
Actually, 2 weeks hence is when we're looking at having the adoption public hearing,
there it is.
Which is March 11th. We've only got 2 elements left to do. The land use element and public school facility element. And public school facility element isn't changing at all because we just did the first one. So let me tell you, we have almost got the draft of the future land use element done. It's not quite done, so it's not on the website. We will hopefully have it on the website the very first of next week, so you can look at it. I do want to warn you, just the data and analysis is 128 pages. And then I think we have 20-something objectives in there. So it's really the major element of the comp plan.
Can we formally request of the applicant to consider our most heartfelt plea that they would consider delaying their sand mine application for 2 weeks?
Well, it would be more than 2 weeks. I think your March meetings are going to be
right.
Okay.
pretty.
We'll buckle we'll buckle down. We'll get it done.
All I'm saying is they actually started before the mining moratorium. I'm not saying they've been diligent, but we'll also be having a workshop yet to be finalized on the mixed-use policy. There've been you all might remember that part of the land use element where we're looking at in some areas of the county allowing residentially designated areas, allowing residential and some commercial, mixed use.
That's coming up when we do it?
That is one of the policies in the land use element. What we're looking at is we've been dealing with people on this the last 6 or 8 months, and we've gotten feedback, and we've been crafting the policy, but we wanted to get everything done. We didn't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, so we're looking at scheduling a workshop sometime before your next meeting. So it'll be either next week or early in the following week.
A workshop with us?
No, a workshop just open to the public. Y'all are invited to it, but it won't be, say, a P&Z holding the workshop. But we're going to focus it mostly on the mixed-use policy. We think that we have enough interested parties to keep a 2-hour discussion going on.
I'll bet.
Would you be kind enough to send us an email when that is available on the web? Thank you.
We will. And the other good news is that Chris Moore would love to come back here with Michael Love, the new traffic engineer, to talk about turn lanes and canals and such. And he said, now here's the thing. Now we're going to have to talk this through a little bit. Well, he said they'd be glad to come in March, but I've got to tell you, as staff, we wouldn't be fulfilling our obligations if we see signs of planning fatigue from you all. Given what's coming up, you might want to consider going to April or something like that. But he's just to let you, they're ready to, they'll be ready to come either in March or if it might need to be April.
I kind of like the October, November, December schedule myself. I don't understand what happened.
Why get a life this year at all? You're right.
I mean, boy. Glad I'm not chairman.
So just wanted you all to think of yourselves as an elite Division I college team. You've got conference rivalries coming up. You've got the conference championship, and you've got March Madness. That's basically what's going on. That's all that I have, Mr.
Attorney matters?
Nothing's not, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Thank you.
Staff, commissioners, thank you. We are adjourned.